My name is Harold Adams, and back in 2016, I decided to take my RV up to the remote stretches of the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska. I'd always been a fan of the great outdoors, fresh air, towering pines, and the kind of silence you can't find in the city. As a freelance photographer, I figured the solitude would do me good, maybe even help me capture that award-winning shot. I had recently gone through a rough patch, a breakup that left me questioning if my jokes were really as funny as I thought. Why did the Scarecrow win an award? Because he was outstanding in his field, I'd quip, only to be met with groans. Maybe my sense of humor needed a new audience. The drive was long but scenic. Snow-capped mountains loomed in the distance, and crystal-clear rivers snaked alongside the winding roads. When I finally reached the RV park near Kachemak Bay, it was nearly dusk. A handful of other RVs dotted the area, but they were spaced far apart, giving everyone a sense of privacy. After setting up camp, I decided to stretch my legs. I wandered toward the communal fire pit, where a few campers were gathered. An older couple, the Millers, greeted me warmly. "First time up here?" Mr. Miller asked. "Yeah, thought I'd try my luck photographing some eagles," I replied. "Be careful if you wander too far," Mrs. Miller warned. "People have gone missing around these parts." I chuckled, thinking it was a local's attempt at spooking the newbie. "Thanks for the tip. I'll make sure not to get lost." As the night wore on, we exchanged stories. I even tested out a new pun. "Did you hear about the guy who invented lifesavers?" They say he made a mint. This time, I got a few genuine laughs. The next morning, I grabbed my camera and headed into the woods. The forest was dense, but beams of sunlight pierced through the canopy, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the forest floor. I snapped photos of anything that caught my eye. A squirrel nibbling on a nut, a formation of birds overhead, the intricate patterns of moss on a fallen log. About an hour in, I stumbled upon something that made me pause, a makeshift campsite that looked abandoned. A tent was collapsed and belongings were strewn about. Oddly, a coffee mug, half filled with rainwater, sat atop a log as if someone had just been there. "Hello?" I called out. No response. I felt a slight unease but brushed it off. Maybe someone left in a hurry due to an emergency. As I turned to leave, I noticed something partially buried under leaves, a small notebook. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked it up. Flipping through the pages, I realized it was a journal. The last entry read, "I think I'm being followed. Footsteps outside my tent last night. Must be the wind?" But it feels off. A chill ran through me, not the metaphorical kind, but an actual cold breeze that seemed out of place on this mild day. I decided it was time to head back. On my way, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle in the bushes had me on edge. Maybe the trees have eyes, I joked to myself, trying to lighten the mood. Or maybe I've watched too many horror movies. When I returned to the RV park, I noticed that the RV next to mine, a vintage Airstream, had its door wide open. I hadn't seen anyone come or go since I arrived. Approaching cautiously, I called out, "Anyone home?" Silence. Inside, the place was a mess. Dishes were broken on the floor, and the cushions were slashed. It didn't look ransacked. It looked frenzied, like someone left in a hurry. Or didn't leave at all. I backed out and went straight to the park's main office. The manager, a gruff man named Dale, looked up from his magazine as I entered. "Something wrong?" he asked. "Yeah, the RV next to mine looks like it's been trashed. The door was open. Nobody's inside." Dale sighed. "That spot's been empty for weeks. Shouldn't be anyone there." "Well, someone's been there, and I found an abandoned campsite in the woods." He frowned. "Best to mind your own business. The forest can be unpredictable." "Unpredictable? That's the best you got?" I retorted. He gave me a stern look. "People come and go. Not my job to keep track." Frustrated, I left the office. Maybe I was overreacting, but something didn't sit right. I decided to do a little digging. I headed to a local diner, figuring small-town gossip might shed some light. Over a cup of coffee and a slice of pie, I struck up a conversation with the waitress, a friendly woman named Karen. "Has anyone gone missing around here lately?" I asked casually. She hesitated before answering. "Why do you ask?" I told her about the campsite and the RV. She lowered her voice. "There have been rumors. Hikers not returning, campers disappearing. The authorities chalk it up to getting lost, but locals think there's more to it. Like what? She glanced around before leaning in. Some say there's a man living deep in the woods, calls himself the Huntsman. They say he doesn't take kindly to outsiders. I raised an eyebrow. Sounds like a bad fairy tale. Believe what you want, she said, but I'd be careful if I were you. On my way back to the RV park, I mulled over what she'd said. An isolated area like this could easily harbor a recluse, but a dangerous one? It seemed far-fetched. That evening, as I reviewed the photos on my camera, I noticed something odd in one of the shots. In the background, partially obscured by trees, was a figure. Zooming in, I could make out a man standing still, watching me. He wore tattered clothing, and his face was shadowed by a hood. "Great, Harold. You've got your own personal Bigfoot," I muttered. I decided to report this to the local police. The station was small, manned by a single officer named Peterson. After showing him the photo, he shrugged. Probably a hunter or another camper. In jeans and a hoodie? Doesn't look like typical hunting gear. He sighed. "Look, we get city folks up here all the time thinking they've seen something wild. Unless there's a crime, there's not much I can do." "People are disappearing," I pressed. "People get lost. It's a big wilderness. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have paperwork to do." Feeling dismissed, I returned to my RV. Night had fallen, and the park was eerily quiet. I locked the doors and double-checked the windows. Maybe I should have brought that baseball bat after all, I joked weakly. Around midnight, I awoke to a faint scraping sound against the side of the RV. My heart pounded as I strained to listen. Then came a whisper. Barely audible. "Come out and play." I froze. This was no animal. Grabbing my phone, I dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. No signal, of course. I whispered a curse under my breath. The scraping continued, moving toward the door. I needed a plan. Looking around, I spotted a flare gun I kept for emergencies. Not ideal, but better than nothing. Taking a deep breath, I swung the door open and fired the flare into the darkness. The sudden light illuminated a figure standing a few yards away. His face was gaunt, eyes wild, and in his hand he held a crude, blood-stained knife. Without thinking, I slammed the door shut and bolted it. Adrenaline surged through me. Footsteps circled the RV, followed by a thud on the roof. "Seriously, this guy thinks he's in an action movie," I muttered, trying to steady my nerves. I remembered that the RV had a roof hatch. If he got in, I'd be trapped. I had to act. Grabbing my keys, I scrambled to the driver's seat. The engine sputtered before roaring to life. "Time to go," I said, flooring the gas pedal. The RV lurched forward, throwing me back slightly. From the side mirror, I saw the man lose his footing and tumble off the roof. As I sped toward the main road, something hit the windshield, a rock, cracking the glass but not shattering it. I didn't look back again. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a gas station that was still open. Bursting inside, I startled the clerk. "Call the police! There's a maniac out there!" I shouted. He grabbed the phone and dialed. Minutes later, Officer Peterson arrived. I recounted everything, my words tumbling out in a rush. He seemed skeptical, but agreed to follow me back. When we returned to the RV park, there was no sign of the man. The area around my RV was undisturbed. No cracks in the windshield, no marks on the door. "This is impossible," I insisted. "He was here." Peterson looked at me carefully. "Have you been drinking?" "What? No." Sometimes the isolation can play tricks on people. Frustrated and exhausted, I knew arguing was pointless. "Fine, but I'm leaving first thing in the morning." He nodded. "Might be best." That night, sleep eluded me. Every sound set me on edge. By dawn, I was packed and ready to leave. As I drove away, I saw Dale, the manager, watching me from his office window. For a moment, our eyes met, and I could have sworn he smirked. I decided to make one last stop at the diner for breakfast. Karen was there, surprised to see me leaving so soon. "Yeah, had enough adventure for one trip," I said. She leaned in. "Be careful on your way out, and watch for detours." I didn't think much of it, until I hit the road. About an hour into the drive, signs indicated a detour ahead due to construction. Following the new route, I realized it led me deeper into the forest. "This can't be right," I said aloud. The road narrowed and the trees grew denser. Suddenly, the RV sputtered and came to a halt, out of gas. Impossible. I filled up yesterday. Stepping outside, I felt the weight of the silence. No birds, no rustling leaves, just stillness. From behind a tree, the man emerged. But this time, he wasn't alone. Dale and Officer Peterson stepped out beside him. "What is this?" I demanded. Dale chuckled. "You couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" Peterson added. "Should have minded your own business." Panic surged through me. "Why are you doing this?" "The huntsman needs his prey," the gaunt man whispered, a twisted smile on his face. I backed away slowly. "Look, I won't tell anyone. Just let me go." Karen's words echoed in my mind. Watch for detours. Realizing this was planned, I knew I had to act fast. Without warning, I sprinted into the woods. Branches slapped my face. Roots threatened to trip me, but adrenaline kept me going. Behind me, I heard them crashing through the underbrush. "You can't run forever," Dale shouted. Spotting a ravine ahead, I made a split-second decision. I slid down the embankment, landing hard but uninjured. A shallow cave caught my eye, a potential hiding spot. I squeezed inside, trying to quiet my ragged breathing. Footsteps approached the edge of the ravine. "Spread out." "He couldn't have gone far," Peterson ordered. They moved away, their voices fading. I waited, counting the minutes. When I was sure they were gone, I emerged cautiously. The forest seemed endless, but I remembered that rivers often lead to towns. Listening carefully, I detected the faint sound of running water. Following it, I eventually reached a riverbank. Upstream, I saw a small bridge, and beyond that, the glint of metal train tracks. Hope surged within me. Staying low, I made my way to the tracks. In the distance, a train whistle blew. I hurried along the rails, waving frantically as the train approached. The conductor must have seen me because the train began to slow down. As it came to a halt, a worker leaned out. "What's going on?" "Please, I need help. There are people trying to kill me." He gestured for me to climb aboard. "Get in. We'll take you to the next station." Relief washed over me as the train pulled away. Safe, at least for now. At the station, I contacted the state police. This time, they took me seriously. An investigation was launched. Days later, authorities discovered that Dale, Peterson, and several others were part of a cult that hunted unsuspecting travelers. They operated in remote areas, making it easy to cover their tracks. Multiple bodies were found near the RV park and surrounding woods, victims who weren't as lucky as me. The Huntsman, whose real name was Victor Hale, was a former survivalist with a penchant for violence. His motivations were rooted in a twisted belief that he was cleansing the world of outsiders. With the ring exposed, arrests were made. The RV park was shut down, and the area became the subject of national news. As for me, I returned home, grateful to be alive. My brush with death had been too close, too real. I later learned that Karen had tipped off the authorities anonymously, providing crucial information. Her subtle warnings had been her way of helping without drawing attention. In the end, justice was served, and the victims' families got the closure they deserved. My name is Jeremy Harris, and I'm 43 years old. This happened last summer while I was investigating a viral ghost story at Devil's Backbone in West Virginia. I've spent years debunking hauntings, cryptid sightings, and so-called cursed places. It's what I do for a living, exposing frauds and hoaxes on my YouTube channel, Reality Bites. I never expected Devil's Backbone to be any different. I was wrong. I arrived at the trailhead late in the afternoon, the sunlight painting the jagged cliffs of the ridge in deep orange hues. Devil's Backbone stretched before me, an imposing line of rocky outcroppings and dense forest. The campground was deserted, just me, my RV, and a few empty fire pits surrounded by overgrown weeds. Perfect for filming. I set up my equipment, cameras, microphones, a drone for aerial shots. I like to have all the angles covered, even if I expected nothing more than crickets and wind. The legend that brought me here was as ridiculous as they come. A group of hikers claimed they'd heard chanting and seen glowing symbols near the ridge. The story had racked up millions of views online, and I figured a straightforward debunking would bring in decent traffic. But something about the ridge unsettled me. It wasn't just the isolation. The cliffs had a presence, like they were watching, waiting. After setting up camp, I hiked up to the ridge for some preliminary footage. The trail was steep and narrow, winding through a forest of twisted, ancient trees. Their gnarled branches formed a canopy that filtered the sunlight into eerie, shifting patterns. About halfway up, I spotted the first symbol. It was carved into the rock, jagged and precise. At first I thought it was graffiti, but it didn't look modern. No spray paint or amateur scribbles. It was intricate, like something you'd see in a textbook on ancient languages. I snapped a photo and moved on, telling myself it was probably just a prank. As I climbed higher, I started to hear faint humming. It wasn't wind or birds, it was rhythmic, almost like chanting. I paused, holding my breath to listen, but it stopped the moment I tried to pinpoint its direction. By the time I reached the ridge, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the forest below. I launched my drone, hoping to capture the cliffs from above. The drone whirred into the sky, its camera sending back clear, steady footage of the ridge and surrounding woods. Then, without warning, the feed cut out. I stared at the screen, confused. The drone was still airborne, but its signal was gone. Moments later, it plummeted out of the sky, crashing somewhere in the trees. Frustrated, I made a note to retrieve it in the morning and headed back to camp. As darkness fell, the first few hours of night were uneventful. I sat inside my RV, editing the day's footage and making notes for the next day. Around midnight, I stepped outside to check the cameras I'd placed around the site. That's when I saw the lights. They flickered along the ridge, moving slowly, like lanterns swaying in the wind. I grabbed my binoculars and focused in. What I saw sent a chill down my spine. A figure stood on the edge of the cliff. It was shrouded in shadow, its features indistinct, but it was watching me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my best effort to stay calm. The figure didn't move. Then, slowly, it raised an arm and pointed directly at me. I backed into the RV, slamming the door shut. My hands shook as I locked it, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe another camper playing a prank. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I found scratches on the RV's exterior. They were deep, parallel grooves like claw marks running along the side of the vehicle. My stomach churned. I checked my cameras, but the footage was corrupted, static and flickers of distorted images. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I hiked back up the ridge. This time, the symbols were everywhere. They were carved into trees, etched into rocks, even scratched into the dirt. The humming started again, louder and more persistent. I reached the crash site of my drone, but it wasn't there. Instead, I found a backpack. It was torn open, its contents scattered, a water bottle, a map, a trail guide. There was no sign of its owner. As I examined the scene, I felt the air grow colder. A shadow passed over me. I turned. The figure from the night before stood just a few feet away. It wasn't human. Its limbs were too long, its face shrouded in darkness, except for its eyes glowing like embers. I ran. Back at camp, I tried to start the RV, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The figure appeared again, standing at the edge of the clearing. This time, it stepped closer. "Why are you here?" A voice hissed, low and guttural. I froze, my mind racing. I thought about Vanessa Davis, the historian I'd spoken to before coming here. She'd warned me about the site's history, that a coven of witches had been executed here centuries ago, accused of summoning spirits to protect their land. "I didn't mean to intrude," I said, my voice shaking. "I'll leave. Just let me go." The figure tilted its head as if considering my words. Then it raised a hand. The symbols around the campsite began to glow, forming a circle of light that trapped me inside. The voice returned, louder this time. "You seek truth where none is welcome. Leave this place or be consumed by it." Desperate, I searched my gear for anything I could use. I found a small bag of salt, an old trick I'd learned for warding off supposed spirits. I poured it around the RV, forming a crude barrier. The figure screamed, a sound that shook the ground beneath me. It lunged at the barrier but couldn't cross it. "Stay away!" I shouted, holding up the salt bag like a shield. The figure retreated, its glowing eyes fixed on me as it faded into the trees. By dawn, the symbols had disappeared. The RV's engine started without issue. I didn't look back as I drove away, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I reviewed the footage later, most of it was unusable, blurry, distorted, filled with static. But one clip stood out. It showed the figure standing on the ridge, its glowing eyes staring directly into the camera. I uploaded the video to my channel, knowing it would be dismissed as a hoax. That was fine by me. Some truths aren't meant to be explained. My name is Sean Walker, and back in 2015, I decided to take my newly acquired RV on a journey through the winding roads of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. After years behind a desk crunching numbers, I thought some fresh air and open spaces might do me good. Besides, how hard could camping be? It's like living at home, but with more trees and fewer takeout options. I stocked the RV, affectionately named Old Bessie, with all the essentials: canned beans, a questionable amount of beef jerky, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. My friends joked that I'd be back within a day, begging for Wi-Fi and a hot shower. I was determined to prove them wrong, or at least not get eaten by a bear. Spoiler alert, bears were the least of my worries. The first day was uneventful, which in my book was a win. I found a secluded spot by a clear stream, set up camp, and even managed to start a fire without singing my eyebrows off. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat outside sipping instant coffee, feeling like a rugged outdoorsman, despite wearing socks with sandals. The next morning, I decided to explore a nearby trail. Armed with a map I could barely read and a compass I pretended to understand, I set off. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, birds chirping, leaves rustling, and my heavy breathing as I realized I was more out of shape than I thought. I stumbled upon a small waterfall and couldn't help but make a self-deprecating joke about finally finding the shower I needed. As I headed back, I noticed a rough-looking man chopping wood near a dilapidated cabin I had somehow missed earlier. He was tall and lean, with a wild beard that suggested razors hadn't been invented yet. "Howdy," I called out, trying to sound casual. He looked up, his eyes sharp. Didn't expect to see anyone round these parts. "Yeah, just doing some camping," I replied. "Name's Sean." He paused before responding. "Walter." "Nice to meet you, Walter. Didn't know anyone lived out here." He gave a curt nod. "Been here a long time." An awkward silence followed. "Well, I'll let you get back to it," I said, backing away slowly. "Be careful out here," he said cryptically. "Strangers can get lost." "Thanks for the tip," I muttered, turning on my heel. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were still on me. That evening, I tried to brush off the encounter. Maybe he was just a hermit who wasn't used to company. I settled into the RV, locked the doors, because that's what you do in the middle of nowhere, and tried to read a book. Sleep came uneasily, with strange noises outside making me jump at every creak. Around midnight, I heard footsteps circling the RV. My heart pounded. I grabbed the closest thing resembling a weapon, a cast-iron skillet, and held my breath. The footsteps stopped, and a faint scratching sound began near the door. Summoning what little courage I had, I flung the door open, skillet raised. No one was there. Feeling foolish, I stepped outside. The night was eerily quiet. Too quiet. I decided it was just a raccoon or maybe a particularly bold squirrel. As I turned to go back inside, something caught my eye. A small carved wooden figurine placed on the step. It was shaped like a human skull. "Very funny," I said aloud, hoping it was some prank by other campers. The next morning, I decided to find Walter. Maybe he knew if there were other people around. Plus, returning his creepy knickknack seemed like a good excuse. I headed toward the cabin, but found it deserted. The place looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. Windows shattered, the door hanging off its hinges, nature reclaiming the structure. A chill ran down my spine. Had I imagined him? No. We definitely spoke. As I examined the cabin, I noticed something disturbing. Photographs pinned to a wall inside. All of different people. Hikers or campers from the looks of it. Some were crossed out in red ink. I snapped a photo with my phone, hands shaking. Time to leave. As I backed away, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I spun around to see Walter emerging from the trees, a hunting rifle slung over his shoulder. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, a sinister smile spreading across his face. "I was just poking around where you shouldn't be," he interrupted. I glanced at the rifle. "Look, I didn't mean any harm." He raised the gun slightly. "City folks never do." Without another word, I bolted. Adrenaline surged as I sprinted toward my RV. Branches whipped my face, and rocks threatened to trip me with every step. I could hear him behind me, his boots pounding the earth. "Can't run forever," he shouted. Challenge accepted, I thought grimly. I reached old Bessie and fumbled with the keys, my hands slick with sweat. Finally, the door unlocked, and I dove inside. I jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine sputtered. "Not now, Bessie. Come on." I glanced out the window. Walter was emerging from the woods, raising his rifle. I ducked as a shot rang out, the bullet shattering the side mirror. "Third time's the charm," I muttered, turning the key again. The engine roared to life. I slammed the RV into gear and stomped on the gas. Another shot hit the rear window, spiderwebbing the glass. The narrow road twisted and turned, and the RV groaned in protest. I didn't care if I blew a tire or wrecked the suspension. I needed to get as far away as possible. After what felt like hours, I spotted a ranger station ahead. Relief washed over me. I pulled in recklessly, nearly hitting a parked Jeep. I stumbled out, shouting incoherently. A park ranger rushed out to meet me. "Sir, are you okay? There's a man. He's trying to kill me." I gasped. The ranger guided me inside. "Calm down and tell me what happened." As I recounted the events, 2 more rangers joined us. They exchanged grim looks. "You're not the first to report something like this," one said. "Who is he?" I demanded. "Name's Walter Griggs," the first ranger replied. "Used to be a hunter until he lost his family in a fire. Been living off the grid ever since. Folks say he's not right in the head." "That's putting it mildly," I retorted. "We'll send a team out to find him," the ranger assured me. "In the meantime, you should stay here." I nodded, exhaustion hitting me like a freight train. They offered me a cot in the back room. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but make a dark joke to myself. Next time I want solitude, I'll just lock myself in the office supply closet. The Rangers weren't able to locate Walter that night. The following morning, they escorted me back to my RV. The damage was worse than I thought. Tires slashed, windows broken, and the words "no escape" carved into the driver's side door. "Looks like I'm not driving out of here," I said wryly. "We can arrange for a tow," the ranger offered. "Appreciate it." While we waited, I asked if they had any more information on Walter. "Legend has it he blames outsiders for what happened to his family," the ranger explained. "Thinks the government or tourists had something to do with it. He's been a ghost in these woods for years." Great, I had to run into the one-man welcoming committee. Soon, the tow truck arrived. As we pulled onto the main road, I took one last look at the dense forest. Part of me half expected to see Walter standing at the tree line, rifle in hand, but there was nothing, just the sway of the trees and the wind. I sighed. Next vacation? A nice, quiet beach. I had been driving for hours, the Mojave Desert stretching endlessly around me, barren and vast under the relentless sun. The road was long behind me now, just an empty trail of dust leading to nowhere. Perfect. This was exactly what I needed, a break from work, from the grind, from people. Out here, there was nothing but silence and space. No cell towers, no deadlines, no distractions. Just me and the desert. I pulled the RV to a stop near a rocky outcrop and stepped out. The air was dry and still, the kind of quiet that felt like it was pressing down on you. I took a deep breath, inhaling the warm scent of sand and stone. This was my escape. No buzzing phone, no frantic emails, just the open sky and the endless horizon. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV in the shade of the rock formation and pulling out my gear. I wanted to explore before the light faded. There was something about the desert that always fascinated me, the way the landscape shifted from harsh to beautiful in a matter of hours. But right now, I was focused on one thing, silence. After weeks of being glued to my phone and running from meeting to meeting, the thought of being completely disconnected was a relief. No cell reception out here, no GPS signal, just me and the land. As I unpacked, I heard it, a faint sound, almost too soft to notice, a rhythmic beeping. At first, I thought it was something inside the RV, maybe an alarm or a piece of equipment malfunctioning. But after a quick check of my gear, everything seemed fine. The sound persisted, though, steady and faint, like a pulse just beneath the surface. I stepped outside, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the desert was quiet. The only sound was the faint wind rustling through the rocks. I brushed it off, assuming it was some distant echo of the RV's systems, and finished setting up camp. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, I felt that familiar sense of calm wash over me. This was why I came here, to escape, to let my mind breathe. But that night, the beeping came back. I was sitting by the campfire, watching the flames flicker against the darkening sky, when the sound returned, clearer this time. It was still faint but persistent, a soft, rhythmic pulse like something distant calling out. I stood, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I wasn't the type to get spooked easily. Logic and reason were my tools, and they had served me well in the world of engineering. But there was something about the sound, something that felt wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from the fire into the darkness. The desert stretched out before me, vast and empty. I started walking, following the faint sound. The rhythmic pulse grew louder as I moved away from the RV. For a while, I saw nothing but sand and rock. The beeping seemed to fade, then grow louder again, like it was moving with me, always just out of reach. I kept walking, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the night. But every time I thought I was getting closer, the sound slipped away. Finally, I stopped. My pulse was racing now, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The beeping had faded again, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the desert. The silence around me was heavy, almost suffocating. I turned back toward the RV. The fire still glowed faintly in the distance as I walked. The beeping returned, faint but steady, like a distant heartbeat. The next morning, the sound was gone. The desert was still and quiet, as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Isolation could do that. The vast emptiness of the desert, the absence of any familiar sounds, it could mess with your head. I decided to hike farther out, hoping to clear my mind. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, the sun already beating down on the sand. I grabbed my gear, making sure I had plenty of water, and started walking toward a rocky ridge I had spotted in the distance. Halfway there, I saw him, a man walking toward me from the opposite direction, his figure small against the endless desert. I hadn't expected to see anyone out here. This was a remote area, far off the beaten path. As the figure grew closer, I could make out an older man, his clothes worn and dusty, his face lined and weathered from the sun. "Hey," I called out, raising a hand as we approached each other. The man nodded, his eyes distant, almost vacant. "You camping out here alone?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, just me," I said, a little taken aback by his bluntness. "I've been walking for days," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You heard it yet? The signal?" I blinked, unsure if I had heard him right. "The signal?" He nodded, his expression grim. "You'll hear it. Once you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. I've been following it for days. It doesn't stop." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" The man glanced around nervously, as if the desert itself was listening. "There's something out here, something that's been broadcasting for years. It gets inside your head. Starts with the beeping, then it gets louder. You'll see." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. He looked dehydrated, sunburned, like he'd been wandering the desert for days without rest. I offered him some water, but he shook his head and started walking again, heading back the way he came without another word. I stood there, watching him disappear into the distance, his words echoing in my mind. "Once you hear it, it doesn't stop." That night, the beeping was louder. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The sound pulsed through the silence, steady and rhythmic, like it was coming from somewhere deep beneath the earth. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the sound was there, burrowing into my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, GPS, water, and set out into the desert. I had to find the source. I had to know what was causing the sound. The desert was pitch black, the sky filled with stars. My flashlight cut through the darkness, the beam dancing across the rocks and sand as I followed the beeping. It was louder now, almost frantic, like it was pulling me towards something. The GPS was acting strange, flickering in and out as if the signal was being disrupted. But I kept moving, my footsteps crunching in the sand. The beeping grew louder with every step. After what felt like hours, I saw it. A structure, half buried in the sand. A bunker or a weather station, long abandoned. The beeping was deafening now, emanating from somewhere inside. I hesitated, standing at the entrance of the bunker. The door was ajar, rusted and creaking in the wind. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to leave and forget about the sound. But I couldn't. The signal was pulling me in. I stepped inside. The air in the bunker was stale, suffocating. My flashlight flickered as I moved through the narrow corridor, the walls lined with rusted equipment and old pop-faded maps. The beeping was louder now, echoing through the metal walls, vibrating in my chest. At the end of the corridor, I found a small room. In the center, there was an old radio tower, its equipment still faintly powered by some unknown source. But that wasn't what caught my attention. On the walls were symbols, strange, intricate markings that looked like they had been carved into the metal. They spiraled outward, converging on the radio tower, as if they were feeding into it. In the corner of the room, I found a journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. The entries were short, scrawled in frantic handwriting. They talked about the signal, how it started with the beeping, how it got louder, how it never stopped. "It gets inside your head," one entry read. "It's not just a sound, it's alive." As I read, the beeping shifted, turning into a high-pitched screech that pierced through my skull. I dropped the journal, clutching my head as the sound rattled through my brain. It wasn't just a signal. It was something more. Something that had been waiting, broadcasting, pulling people in. I had to get out. I stumbled out of the bunker, the sound still ringing in my ears. The desert spun around me. I ran, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The landscape warped, the rocks and sand shifting as if the desert itself was alive, moving with the signal. When I finally made it back to the RV, I collapsed inside, my head pounding. The beeping was now a constant, dull hum in the back of my mind. I left the desert the next morning, driving as fast as I could. The beeping was still faint but persistent. I didn't look back. Even now, days later, back in the city, I can still hear it. A faint, rhythmic pulse in the back of my mind. Always there, always calling me back. The signal isn't done with me yet. My name is Amber Janis, and I'm 33 years old. This happened last October when I decided to camp alone at Smoke Hollow, a remote site near the Greenbrier River in West Virginia. I thought it would be a quiet, picturesque trip, a chance to photograph the eerie beauty of an old settlement long forgotten by time. Instead, I barely made it out alive. The idea came to me while scrolling through an article about abandoned places. Smoke Hollow was once a bustling logging village in the late 1800s, but in the early 1900s, its population vanished under mysterious circumstances. All that remained were the ruins of a few homes and a cemetery overgrown with moss and wild ivy. Local legends spoke of ghostly wails echoing through the hollow at night, but I figured those were just stories meant to scare off tourists. I was drawn to the place because it sounded like the perfect subject for my blog, Forgotten Trails. After my divorce, exploring remote and spooky locations became my therapy. Documenting these places filled the empty hours, gave me purpose. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I welcomed it. At least, that's what I told myself. The road to Smoke Hollow was narrow and winding, with ancient trees towering on either side. By the time I arrived at the campground, the late afternoon sun was hidden behind thick gray clouds. The place was deserted except for a lone park ranger at the check-in station. First time here? she asked, smiling. Her name tag read Maya Andrews. Yeah, heard about it online, I said. Maya nodded. Beautiful spot, but it can be disorienting. Fog rolls in heavy, and the echoes in the hollow can mess with your sense of direction. Stay on marked paths, and you'll be fine. Her words didn't bother me. I'd camped alone before. I smiled, thanked her, and drove to my site near the river. The air was damp and cold, carrying the faint, earthy smell of decaying leaves. I parked my RV, set up my gear, and took a short hike to the cemetery before nightfall. The graveyard was small, maybe 20 headstones, most of them cracked or leaning. One in particular caught my eye. A child's grave marked Lillian Reed, 1898 to 1905. A small lamb was carved into the stone, worn smooth by time. I snapped a few photos, the sky darkening faster than I expected, and headed back to camp. That night, the fog came in thick and fast, pressing against the RV windows like a living thing. I was reviewing my photos when I heard it, a faint, high-pitched wail cutting through the silence. It sounded like a child crying. I froze, my heart thudding. It couldn't be an animal. It was too human. I turned off the lights and peered outside. The fog distorted everything, but I saw no movement. I told myself it was just the wind and tried to go back to editing. But the cry came again. This time, closer. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, shivering in the cold. "Hello?" I called, my voice swallowed by the mist. "Is someone there?" Nothing, just the river gurgling faintly in the distance. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I went back inside, I locked the door and pulled the blinds shut. It was a long time before I fell asleep. The next morning, I found wet handprints on my RV windows. Small ones, like a child's. My stomach churned. The fog had cleared, leaving the woods damp and muddy, but there were no tracks around the RV, no signs that anyone had been there. Shaking off the unease, I decided to head back to the cemetery. It was brighter in the daylight, though the thick canopy still gave the place a shadowy quality. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a journal, lying partially buried beneath a toppled tombstone. Curiosity got the better of me. I brushed off the dirt and opened it. The faded handwriting belonged to someone named Eleanor Reed, likely the mother of the child whose grave I'd seen. The entries were ordinary at first, mentioning chores and weather. But near the end, they took a darker turn. One passage stuck with me. Lillian hears them at night, the crying children. I thought she was dreaming, but now I hear them too. We must leave, but the forest won't let us go. My hands trembled as I closed the journal. It was just an old story, I told myself, a grieving mother's imagination. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with this place. That night, the crying returned, louder, more insistent. I stayed inside, clutching my flashlight. The sound circled the RV, as if whoever, or whatever, it was wanted me to follow. I fought the urge to look. Then the generator failed, plunging me into complete darkness. I scrambled for my backup lantern, fumbling with the switch. When it flickered to life, I saw them. Small, wet footprints, leading from the door to the far corner of the RV. My breath caught. The crying had stopped, replaced by faint, rapid tapping on the windows. "Go away," I whispered, backing into a corner. The tapping grew louder, frantic. Then silence. And somehow, that was worse. I felt trapped, as though the darkness itself was closing in, suffocating me. I didn't sleep at all. By morning, I was exhausted and desperate to leave. But when I stepped outside, my heart sank. Deep scratches raked across the RV's exterior. The tires were slashed, rubber shredded like paper. I was stranded. I decided to hike back to the cemetery, hoping to find a clue in Eleanor's journal, or at least distract myself. But the path felt different this time. Unfamiliar. The trees seemed to shift around me, their branches reaching like skeletal hands. I stumbled into the clearing, and my blood ran cold. A figure stood by Lillian's grave. At first, I thought it was a child, but something about its proportions was wrong. Its arms were too long, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. It turned toward me, and I saw its face. Hollow eyes, a wide, dripping grin, water pooled around its feet, soaking the earth. I couldn't move. It opened its mouth, emitting a guttural, inhuman wail that echoed through the trees. My legs finally obeyed. I ran. The sound chased me all the way back to the RV. That night, the entity attacked. It battered the RV, its cries deafening. The windows rattled, the walls creaked. I remembered the journal's warning. The forest won't let us go. But it wasn't the forest, it was this thing. This embodiment of grief and rage. Desperate, I turned on my phone and played a voice recording I'd taken of Maya's advice. Stay near the marked paths. Her calm, human voice cut through the chaos like a beacon. The entity recoiled, its form flickering. I grabbed the journal, clutching it like a talisman, and shouted, "Lillian, stop! You're free!" The wailing stopped. The air grew still. For a moment, I thought it was over, until I heard a soft, wet laugh behind me. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, the RV abandoned behind me. A passing car picked me up, and I barely managed to explain what had happened. When we passed Smoke Hollow, I saw it. The figure. Standing in the fog. Its hollow eyes followed me. I never went back. The photos I took were strange, blurry, distorted, as though the camera couldn't quite capture the truth. But one image haunts me most. A figure standing by Lillian's grave, its face staring straight into the lens. And I've stopped camping alone. Some silences are meant to stay undisturbed. My name's Russell Hunter, and this happened to me in 2022 at Lassen Volcanic National Park in California. I was just taking some time to myself after my divorce, figuring some fresh air and a quiet place might clear my head. Even though an RV trip wasn't exactly my go-to, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I pulled up near a trailhead by Lake Helen, a remote spot with only the sound of boiling mud pits and the occasional hiss from a feral animal somewhere off in the distance. I was all set to spend a quiet night out here, far from anyone I knew, and with no cell service to pester me about work. Little did I know, some alone time would be the last thing I needed. The first hint of trouble started around dusk. I was setting up a little campfire, planning to roast a few marshmallows and call it an early night. That's when I saw him, just a figure on the opposite side of the lake, about 200 yards out, staring straight in my direction. He was a guy in worn-out denim overalls, no shirt, and a hat that looked like it had been through more than one rainstorm. Nothing too strange at first, just a camper a little farther off. But he didn't move for a good 10 minutes. He stood there, hands hanging at his sides, and just watched. I yelled out, "Hello." Friendly enough, right? No response. Not a wave, not a nod, not even a turn of his head. He just kept staring, frozen, like he was posing for a creepy statue commission. Feeling a chill, not from the cold, but something else. I picked up my marshmallow stick and muttered to myself about minding my own business. Darkness fell, and the figure faded into the night. I convinced myself he was probably just another camper or a lost hiker who thought better of bothering someone in an RV. Maybe he went back to wherever he'd set up his tent. Maybe he didn't, and maybe I didn't want to know. I woke up around midnight to a sound. Something tapping against the side of my RV. Tap, tap, tap. Not loud, but persistent. My heart went from 0 to 100 real quick. I grabbed the flashlight, climbed down from the bed, and tiptoed to the door. My first thought? A raccoon. Or maybe a tree branch scraping the side in the wind. But I'd parked clear of any trees. "Who's there?" I called out, almost hoping for no answer. Silence. The tapping stopped, leaving an even eerier stillness. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but I kept the flashlight on, just in case. I managed to fall back asleep, more out of exhaustion than comfort. Until I heard footsteps, circling the RV. Around 3 a.m., slow, deliberate footsteps, crunching against the gravel, like whoever it was knew exactly how to keep me on edge. I held my breath, lying there in the dark, pretending I couldn't hear anything, hoping the person or thing would go away. The footsteps stopped, right outside my window, and then I heard breathing, heavy, wet, and wheezy, as if this person had just run a marathon. I couldn't help it. I glanced through the blinds, careful not to make a sound. What I saw still makes my skin crawl. It was the man in the overalls, staring, at the window, as if he knew exactly where I was hiding. His face was too close to the glass, his expression unreadable, like he was lost in thought, or just waiting. I stayed as still as I could, trying to be invisible. My mind raced through options: drive off, shout for help, or sit in silence and pray he'd leave. Then he turned abruptly and began circling the RV again. I heard the crunch of his boots moving around, getting closer to the door. At this point, I felt I had no choice. I grabbed my keys, jumped into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The headlights flashed on, and in that brief moment, I saw him, standing directly in front of the RV, blocking my path. He had this expression, a mix of anger and amusement, like he was daring me to do something stupid. "Move," I shouted, leaning on the horn. He just grinned. His teeth caught the light in a way that was too chilling to be accidental. Then he held up something, a battered old hunting knife. I didn't need a clearer signal. I slammed on the gas, praying he'd step aside. He did, at the very last second, stumbling backward with a scowl. I didn't look back. I kept going, my heart pounding like it would beat out of my chest. I got out of there, drove to the nearest ranger station, and explained what had happened. The ranger, a calm, seasoned-looking guy, didn't look as surprised as I'd hoped. He told me a story about an old hermit named Clyde, a local who had supposedly disappeared a few years ago after some kind of family tragedy. Rumor had it, he was living rough in the wilderness, rarely bothering campers, but enough to make people nervous when he did. "Clyde," I muttered, running the name through my mind. It fit. There was something off, something crazed about the way he looked at me, as if he was caught between different worlds. After making sure I was all right, the ranger said he'd look into it, but his calm demeanor didn't settle my nerves. He seemed more resigned than anything, like he'd dealt with Clyde's disturbances before and didn't expect anything to change. As if Clyde had become part of the scenery, just as much as the boiling mud pits and sulfurous springs. Days later, back home, I couldn't shake what happened. A few online searches turned up stories, unconfirmed but chilling enough, of campers who'd gone missing, only to have their bodies found weeks later in the woods, each with strange markings cut into their arms. None of these stories made it to the news. Too far-fetched, or maybe just too unsettling for anyone to confirm. I found a police sketch. It looked almost exactly like Clyde, described as the loner, someone who knew the land better than anyone else. He had become something of a legend among the locals, a cautionary tale for campers venturing too far from the beaten path. That's when I read a line that brought everything crashing down on me. Some say he carves those who stray into his territory, leaving a mark only those who dare to cross him ever see. For all the comfort I took in the fact that I'd survived the night, I could still feel Clyde's eyes on me. That grin, etched in my memory, the glint of the knife, and the sense that I'd gotten too close to something best left alone. My name is Randy Smith, and back in 2015, I took my RV to the dense forests of Olympic National Park in Washington State. After 15 years of juggling numbers as an accountant, I figured it was time to exchange spreadsheets for pine trees. Maybe I'd find out if bears really do prefer picnic baskets. The open road was a welcome change from the monotony of office life, and as I drove, the skyscrapers faded into towering evergreens, and the air grew crisp and fresh. I wondered if this was what air was supposed to smell like without the usual hint of exhaust fumes. By late afternoon, I found the perfect spot to set up camp, a secluded clearing near Lake Crescent. The water shimmered under the fading sunlight, and the only sounds were the rustling leaves and distant bird calls. Not bad for a city slicker, I thought, patting myself on the back. I spent the next hour setting up, unfolded my chair, fired up the portable grill, and even attempted to fish off the lake's edge. The fish seemed unimpressed with my bait, probably mocking me from beneath the surface. Fine, I'll stick to canned beans, I laughed to myself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I settled by the campfire, enjoying the serenity. The stars began to peek out, more vivid than I'd ever seen. It was humbling, made me realize how small we are, just tiny specks in a vast universe. Or maybe that was the beans talking. Around 10 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I secured the RV, double-checking the locks, a habit from living in the city. Climbing into bed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Maybe I should quit my day job and become a professional camper, I mused before drifting off. A loud thud jolted me awake. Groggy, I glanced at my phone. 1:13 a.m. I listened intently. Another thud, followed by what sounded like metal scraping against metal. Probably just a raccoon, I told myself, though my pulse quickened. Curiosity got the better of me. Grabbing a flashlight, I peered out the window. In the dim glow, I saw a figure near the rear of the RV, not a raccoon unless they had started wearing jackets and standing upright. "Hey, who's there?" I shouted, hoping to sound more confident than I felt. The figure froze, then slowly turned toward me. The flashlight beam caught his face, a rugged man with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes were dirty and torn. He stared at me for a moment before breaking into a wide grin. "Evening, friend," he drawled. "Can I help you?" I asked, gripping the flashlight tighter. "Sorry to bother you," he said, taking a few steps closer. "My name's Roy. Truck broke down a mile back. Mind if I use your phone to call for help?" Something felt off. Maybe it was the odd hour or the fact that there was no vehicle in sight. "I don't have a signal out here," I replied. "Closest ranger station is about 10 miles east." He chuckled softly. "No signal, huh? Mind if I come in and wait till morning then?" I hesitated. "I'm sorry, but I'd prefer if you didn't. Nothing personal." His smile faded. "That's not very neighborly of you." "Look, I can't help you. Please leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He stared at me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "All right then. You have a good night." He turned and walked back into the darkness. I waited until I could no longer hear his footsteps before exhaling. "That was weird," I muttered. I decided it was best to move on. I started the engine, ready to find a new spot or maybe head to the ranger station myself. As I shifted into gear, the RV lurched but didn't move. I tried again. Nothing. Stepping outside to investigate, I found the rear tires slashed. My heart sank. This was no coincidence. A rustling sound came from the bushes nearby. I spun around, flashlight scanning the tree line. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a low whistle pierced the quiet night. "Looking for me?" Roy stepped out, holding a hunting knife that glinted ominously. "What do you want?" I demanded, backing toward the RV door. He shrugged casually. "Company. It's a lonely night." I bolted inside and slammed the door, locking it. My mind raced. The tires were ruined, and there was no cell signal. I needed a plan. A pounding on the door made me jump. "Open up, Randy," he called out. My blood ran cold. How did he know my name? Then I remembered the name tag on my backpack, visible through the window. "Go away," I shouted. He laughed. "We could have been friends, you know, but you had to be rude." I searched the RV for anything that could serve as a weapon. My eyes landed on a flare gun in the emergency kit. Not ideal, but better than nothing. The pounding grew more aggressive. The door hinges creaked under the strain. "Last chance," he warned. I took position at the far end of the RV, flare gun aimed at the door. With a final crash, the door gave way, and Roy stepped inside. "Leave me alone," I yelled. He took a step forward. "Or what?" Without hesitation, I fired the flare gun. The bright light shot across the space, striking him in the shoulder. He screamed as his shirt caught fire, stumbling backward out of the RV. Seizing the moment, I grabbed my keys and prayed the engine would cooperate. The RV groaned but moved, slowly forward, riding on the rims. I steered onto the main road, the metal screeching against the asphalt. In the rearview mirror, I saw Roy extinguishing the flames, his face twisted in rage. He didn't give chase, but his eyes bore into me. A silent promise of vengeance. After a grueling hour, I spotted lights ahead, a small gas station, miraculously open. I pulled in, the attendant staring wide-eyed at the damaged RV. "Call the police," I blurted out. "There's a maniac out there who attacked me." He hurried inside to make the call. Minutes later, the place was swarming with officers. I recounted everything, from the initial encounter to the attack. A search team was dispatched, and by dawn, they had Roy in custody. Turns out his real name was Martin Blake, a drifter with a long history of violent crimes. He'd been eluding authorities for months. An officer approached me as I sipped stale coffee inside the station. "You're lucky," he said. We found evidence at his campsite suggesting he was planning something far worse. I didn't ask for details. Some things are better left unknown. They took my statement and offered medical assistance, but aside from a bruised ego, I was unharmed. The RV, on the other hand, would need some serious repairs. As the sun rose, I thanked the officers and arranged for a tow back to the city. So much for my peaceful getaway. Before leaving, the attendant handed me a fresh cup of coffee. "On the house?" he said with a sympathetic smile. "Rough night?" I chuckled. "You could say that. Next time I want to get away, maybe I'll just visit a park in broad daylight." He laughed. "Can't argue with that." Back in the city, life returned to its usual pace. The office gossip, the clacking of keyboards, the overpriced lattes. It all felt different now. Maybe I wasn't cut out for the wilderness, or maybe I just had exceptionally bad luck. One thing's for sure, I've got a hell of a story for the next office party, and perhaps an excuse to avoid camping invitations for the foreseeable future. They say nature is healing. I think I'll stick to therapy. My name is Harold Adams. I'm 32, a retired firefighter, and this happened in Seneca Creek backcountry, West Virginia, a year after I lost my wife, Emily. I had planned the trip hoping to find peace or at least distraction in nature. What I found was something I can never forget. It started as a simple RV camping trip, my first time alone. Emily and I had always loved the outdoors, and this seemed like a way to reconnect with that part of my life. Seneca Creek, with its waterfalls and isolation, felt like the perfect place to be alone with my thoughts. I told myself the solitude would help, that it was what I needed. I wasn't ready for what came next. The drive into the backcountry was uneventful. The gravel road leading to the campsite felt endless, hemmed in by towering trees that cast long shadows even in the midday sun. I stopped at a small gas station near the turnoff, where an older woman named Marlene ran the counter. "You're heading into Seneca Creek?" she asked as I paid for firewood and a few snacks. I nodded. "Yeah, just me and the RV." Marlene gave me a strange look, her hand pausing over the register. "Be careful out there," she said, her voice low. "These woods aren't always kind to those traveling alone." I wanted to ask what she meant, but she turned away to help another customer. Her words lingered in my mind as I drove the final stretch. The campsite by Judy Springs was everything I'd hoped for. Quiet, picturesque, and completely isolated. I parked the RV near the creek, the sound of rushing water a soothing backdrop as I unpacked. That first night, I sat by the fire, sipping coffee and staring at the stars. For the first time in months, I felt calm. The first sign that something wasn't right came the next evening. The day had been perfect. I hiked to Seneca Falls, taking photos and jotting notes in a journal I'd started since Emily's death. I even smiled a few times, thinking about how much she would have loved the view. But as I headed back to camp, a strange feeling crept over me. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my boots on the trail. When I reached the RV, the unease deepened. My firewood, neatly stacked by the pit, was scattered across the ground. At first, I thought an animal had gotten into it, but the pieces were arranged strangely, as if they'd been tossed deliberately. I shrugged it off and rebuilt the fire, telling myself I was imagining things. But that night, as I sat by the flames, I saw it for the first time. A shadow moved between the trees. It wasn't the flicker of firelight. This was deliberate, purposeful, like someone pacing at the edge of the forest. I stood up, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, the sound of my own voice startling me. No response. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the trees. Nothing. But as I turned back to the fire, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. A shape, humanoid but wrong, slipped behind a tree, vanishing before I could focus on it. I slept in the RV that night, the doors locked and curtains drawn. The third day brought more unsettling signs. I woke to find muddy footprints leading from the creek to the RV. They were human-like but elongated, the toes too long and splayed. They stopped abruptly a few feet from the door, as if whoever or whatever made them had simply vanished. That afternoon, while hiking to an overlook, I stumbled upon something even stranger, symbols carved into the rocks. They weren't like any markings I'd seen before, almost as if they were burned into the stone. The air felt heavier there, as if the forest were holding its breath. I hurried back to camp, but the unease followed me. That night, the shadows returned. This time, they were closer. I sat by the fire, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. The shadowy figure appeared again, standing motionless at the edge of the trees. It was tall, too tall, and its limbs were unnaturally long. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice breaking. It didn't move. The fire flickered, the flames shrinking as if smothered by an unseen force. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight, and when I looked again, the figure was gone. By the fourth morning, I'd had enough. I packed up, determined to leave, but the RV wouldn't start. The engine cranked but refused to turn over, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I decided to hike back to the gas station for help. I marked my trail carefully, leaving a breadcrumb of sticks and rocks so I wouldn't get lost. But the forest had other plans. No matter which direction I went, the paths looped back to my campsite. I walked for hours, my legs aching, only to find myself standing in front of the RV again. As the sun set, the shadows returned. This time, there were more of them. Figures moved through the trees surrounding the campsite, their glowing yellow eyes piercing the darkness. I barricaded myself inside the RV, clutching a flare gun I'd brought for emergencies. The shadows circled outside, their footsteps echoing unnaturally loud against the silence. Then the radio came on. Static filled the air, crackling and distorted, before a song began to play, a song I hadn't heard since Emily's funeral. It was her favorite, and hearing it now, here, made my blood run cold. Her voice followed, faint and pleading. "Harold, leave." I stared at the radio, my hands trembling. "Emily?" The voice came again, softer this time. "You have to go." The shadows closed in, their forms pressing against the windows of the RV. I fired the flare through the nearest window, the bright red light igniting the darkness. The figures recoiled, their shapes dissolving like smoke. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed the keys and tried the ignition one last time. The engine roared to life. I drove through the night, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The forest seemed alive, the trees bending unnaturally, as if trying to block my escape. When I finally reached the gas station, Marlene was waiting. She didn't seem surprised to see me, her expression unreadable. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded, unable to speak. Marlene sighed. "It's the Shadow Man. He feeds on people's grief, their fear. He doesn't kill, he traps you, keeps you lost in the dark until there's nothing left." I left West Virginia the next day, vowing never to return. The shadows are gone now, but sometimes, late at night, I hear faint footsteps outside my window, and I wonder if the Shadow Man ever truly let me go. I wasn't expecting much when I decided to go camping. I just needed some time away from everything. The endless noise of the city, the constant work, the stress. I figured a weekend in the middle of nowhere would do me good. No people, no obligations, just me and the stars. At first, I had planned on going with some friends, but they all bailed. I didn't want to back out, so I went alone. The plan was simple: find a quiet spot, park my RV, set up camp, and just be. I found this campsite just off some back roads in Texas. It was far enough away from the nearest town to feel isolated, but not so far that it was dangerous. I figured I'd be fine. The worst that could happen was I'd get a little bored, right? I showed up, set up my RV, and got a small fire going. Nothing crazy, just a few logs to keep warm. I had brought a cooler with some food, a couple of beers, and some books to read. As the night crept in, everything started to feel calm, too calm almost. The trees were dead still. The wind barely moved, the kind of silence that feels unnatural after a while. But I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just getting paranoid. It's easy to do when you're alone. I spent the evening just relaxing. I ate a simple meal, nothing fancy, grilled a few sausages, had some chips. I opened a beer and stared into the fire, watching the flames flicker. I remember feeling weirdly calm, despite how silent everything was. But then, around midnight, the silence started to feel oppressive, almost like I was waiting for something to happen. I kept hearing sounds in the distance, something snapping in the trees, but every time I turned around, nothing was there. A raccoon? A deer? Something small? I kept telling myself it was nothing. By around 1 a.m., I was exhausted. I shut everything down, locked the RV, and crawled into bed. I remember thinking as I lay there, this is nice. Too quiet, but nice. My eyes closed, and I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up with a headache so intense it felt like someone had been drilling into my skull all night. It took me a second to focus on what was going on. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the fog out of my head, but it wasn't helping. Then I noticed it. The RV door was wide open. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't opened it. I'd locked it before going to bed. I was sure of it. But there it was, the door standing wide open, the cool night air rushing in, the dim light from the campfire casting long shadows into the RV. I didn't hear anything, no footsteps, no voices. The world outside was still. It was as if the entire campground was holding its breath. But the headache, it was like nothing I'd ever felt before. I could barely think straight. I sat up in bed, my legs feeling like jelly, my mind scrambling. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I'd just forgotten to lock the door. But the deeper I thought about it, the more I realized something wasn't right. I stumbled out of bed, dizziness hitting me in waves. The air inside the RV felt heavier than normal, like it had been closed up for too long. I moved toward the door, trying to shake off the dizziness. When I reached the door, I looked outside. The campground was still empty, the fire burning low. The RV's steps creaked under my weight as I took a step out onto the dirt. Everything seemed normal at first, but I felt like I was missing something important. I looked back at the RV, and that's when it hit me. I didn't remember the door opening, not once, not even a crack, and I definitely didn't leave it open. I went back inside, heart hammering. I checked everything. My wallet was missing. I was sure I'd left it on the counter next to the sink, but now it was gone. I checked the windows. They were all shut tight, the curtains still drawn. No one had broken in through the windows, but that still didn't explain the door. I started to feel like I was going insane. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe someone had been here while I slept. Maybe they had opened the door after I was knocked out. Knocked out. That's when I remembered the headache. I hadn't just woken up with a headache. It was like someone had drugged me, a sharp, foggy feeling in my brain that wasn't just from sleep. It felt chemical. Something was wrong. I ran my hand along the vent above my head. The air was warm. A terrible thought struck me. What if someone had pumped something into the RV to knock me out? I started checking every vent in the RV, touching them one by one, feeling the warmth seep through. It hit me that I'd never paid much attention to the ventilation before. There were no signs of a break-in, no marks on the door, no smashed windows. But what if someone had been inside, watching me while I slept? What if they'd opened the door after I was drugged? I walked around the RV again, my mind racing. My legs felt shaky, like I hadn't eaten in days, like I was about to pass out. But something was making my blood run cold, the feeling that I wasn't alone. The sensation that someone had been here. And it wasn't just the open door. That's when I found the small bag under the bed. At first, I thought it was mine, just some gear I'd forgotten about. But when I opened it, I froze. Inside were items I didn't recognize. Gloves, rope, a flashlight, a small knife, a bag that looked like it could fit a person's head in it. It was all too planned. This wasn't just a robbery. Someone had been preparing for something worse. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to do. I could feel my pulse thumping in my ears. I wasn't safe here. Whoever had been in my RV could still be nearby, watching. I grabbed my phone. No signal. Panic surged through me. I needed to get out. I ran to the RV's engine, praying it would start, but it sputtered and died. I tried again. Nothing. Whoever had been here had tampered with it. My legs felt weak, but I knew I had no choice. I had to run. I bolted out the door into the cold night with no clear direct, just away from the RV. My body was sluggish, my brain foggy from whatever they drugged me with, but I couldn't stop. I heard footsteps behind me, too quiet to pinpoint, but they were there. I could feel them. Whoever it was following me. I kept running, my heart pounding, sweat trickling down my forehead despite the chill. I had no idea how far I'd gone, or if I was even heading in the right direction. But then I saw headlights. A truck. I waved my arms like a maniac, and thank God they stopped. The driver helped me into the truck, and I was barely able to speak, my head still throbbing with that unrelenting pain. I tried to tell him what happened, but it was all jumbled. He just listened, confused, but kind enough to take me to the nearest town. The police took my statement, but they didn't believe me. They said I was probably just disoriented, that I had overreacted to a simple break-in. They didn't find anything near the RV, no signs of a struggle, no footprints, nothing. I don't go camping alone anymore. The road into the Adirondacks was long, winding, and empty, just how I liked it. After a few hours of driving, I pulled the RV off the narrow trail and into a small clearing by the lake. The pines stretched high and thick around me, their dark green needles blending into the overcast sky. This was exactly what I needed, complete isolation. No people, no noise, just the quiet of the forest and the sound of my own thoughts. I parked the RV, turned off the engine, and stepped outside. The air was cool, crisp with the faint smell of pine and damp earth. The only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant ripple of water. Perfect. This place would give me the quiet I craved, a chance to think without the distractions of civilian life. Ever since leaving the military, I'd been chasing peace, and this felt like it could be the spot where I'd finally find it. I grabbed my gear and went about setting up camp. It didn't take long. I'd done this enough times to know the routine. Gather firewood, get a small fire going, and make sure the RV was ready for a night out in the wilderness. As I made my way through the trees, something caught my eye. On one of the nearby trunks, there was a strange marking, a crude carving of a figure, long and thin, etched into the bark. I frowned, running my fingers over it. Just a kid's prank, I figured, probably a bored hiker from weeks ago. But as I moved through the forest gathering wood, I found more of them. Carved figures on the trees, all tall and slender, stretching higher than any human could reach. It was strange, but I wasn't here to think about strange things. I was here to forget. By the time the sun set, the fire was crackling softly, casting flickering light across the clearing. I settled in next to the warmth, staring out at the darkening forest. There was a peace in the solitude, something comforting about being alone with the sounds of the wilderness. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something. The forest was too quiet. No rustling leaves, no night animals scurrying about, just silence. And then, just beyond the edge of the firelight, I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush. I sat up, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Nothing. The beam of light cut through the trees, but there was no movement, no sign of anything unusual. I shook my head. "You're just on edge," I muttered to myself, trying to dismiss the tension building in my chest. The wilderness could play tricks on you if you let it. I knew that better than most. I was here to clear my head, not to let it run wild. But then I saw it. At the edge of my vision, just for a split second, something moved. Tall, thin, just beyond the trees. I jumped to my feet, gripping the flashlight tighter, and aimed the beam toward where I'd seen the figure. But there was nothing, only the dark outline of the pines swaying slightly in the wind. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, every muscle tense, waiting for something to step out of the shadows. But after a long moment, the rustling stopped, the trees swayed, and the forest fell back into its unsettling quiet. I forced myself to sit back down, staring into the fire, trying to shake off the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The next morning, I woke early, determined to shake off the nerves from the night before. I grabbed my gear and decided to hike deeper into the woods. Maybe if I put some distance between myself and the campsite, I could clear my head. The trail was faint, barely more than a thin path winding through the trees. As I walked, I found more of the carvings on the trees, each one stranger than the last. They were everywhere, slender, Elongated figures with no faces, all staring outward, all watching. The forest felt darker here, the canopy thick enough that the sunlight barely broke through. About an hour in, I reached a ridge overlooking the valley. The view was stunning. Endless trees stretching out below, the mountains rising in the distance. I was about to pull out my camera when I heard footsteps behind me. "Morning," a voice said. I turned to see an older man, probably in his 60s, standing a few feet away. He was holding a bundle of firewood in his arms, his face weathered and sun-creased like someone who'd spent his entire life outdoors. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, giving him a nod. "Not many people come this deep into the forest," the man replied, his voice low and rough. He looked me up and down, then glanced toward the valley. "You camping nearby?" "Yeah, just over by the lake. Trying to get some quiet." He gave me a long look, his expression unreadable. "You should be careful. This part of the Alder Andax, it's different." "Different how?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He glanced around, his eyes flicking nervously toward the trees. "There's something in these woods. People call it the Watcher. It stays deep in the forest, watching from the shadows. You see it once, and you'll start seeing it everywhere." I laughed, shaking my head. "Local ghost stories." The man didn't smile. "It's not a story. It's real. People who see the Watcher, they don't come back the same." He took a step closer. "I'm telling you this because you look like you've seen things. You know when something's not right, and something's not right here." I met his gaze, feeling that familiar knot of unease tightening in my gut. "What do you mean?" "You'll know when it's close. You'll hear it first, and then you'll feel it." He turned, starting back down the trail. "Just don't stay too long." I watched him go, his words echoing in my mind. Part of me wanted to laugh it off as superstition, but the way he'd looked at me, like he'd seen the same thing I had last night, made it hard to dismiss. That evening, back at camp, the unease was worse. The forest felt like it was closing in, the trees towering higher than I remembered, the shadows deeper, darker. The wind had picked up, making the fire flicker and sputter, but it didn't drown out the sounds. The rustling came back, louder this time, and with it something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the campsite. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the darkness, but the beam barely seemed to penetrate the trees. The footsteps stopped as soon as the light hit them, but when I moved the beam, they started again. I stood, turning in a slow circle, the flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other. My pulse was pounding, adrenaline kicking in. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone out here. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything. And then, just beyond the firelight, I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing between the trees. Its body was almost skeletal, its limbs too long, its head bent slightly as if it were watching me from above. Its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, were hollow, dark pits that stared right at me. My blood ran cold. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching, its presence pressing down on me like a weight. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking despite myself. The figure didn't respond. It stayed still, silent, its form almost blending into the shadows. I raised my knife, backing toward the RV. The figure remained at the edge of the light, watching, waiting. I reached the door, yanked it open, and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. For hours, I sat by the window, knife in hand, waiting for the figure to move. But it never did. It just stood there, barely visible in the darkness, its hollow eyes fixed on the RV. At dawn, the figure was gone, but the carvings had multiplied, dozens of them surrounding the campsite. The same tall, thin figures etched into the trees like a silent army. I didn't waste time. I packed up everything, threw it into the RV, and started the engine. As I drove away, the carvings seemed to watch me, following me down the narrow trail, their hollow eyes staring. I didn't stop until I was miles away from the area, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. But even as the trees thinned and the road stretched out in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Watcher was still out there, somewhere in those woods. It was still watching, and maybe it always would be. I pulled the RV off the narrow, dusty road and into the shadow of Dead Man's Gulch. The engine sputtered to a stop, and for a moment I sat there in silence, staring out at the barren valley stretching before me. The Ruby Mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and dark against the fading light. This was exactly what I wanted: isolation, quiet, and a place where the world couldn't find me. The RV had become my escape after Laura died. I could roam wherever I wanted, park wherever I pleased, and it felt like a kind of freedom. But now, sitting here in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The place had a weight to it, like the air was thick with something unseen, something waiting. I climbed out of the RV and stretched, the dry desert air biting at my skin as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. Dead Man's Gulch was as desolate as it sounded. I had read about it in a ghost stories book I found at a thrift store. Some legend about miners who disappeared back in the late 1800s. They supposedly saw shadowy figures in the valley at night before the earth collapsed and swallowed them whole. I didn't believe in ghosts, cryptids, or any of the nonsense locals spouted about this place. I just wanted to be alone, away from the pitying glances and endless condolences. No one understood how grief gnawed at you, hollowing you out until nothing was left. Setting up camp took about 15 minutes. I parked the RV next to the remnants of an old mining camp. A few rusted-out carts, the skeletal remains of a cabin, and a collapsed mine shaft disappearing into the hillside. It was perfect. No people, no distractions. Just me, the desert, and the stars. By the time I finished dinner, canned chili, nothing fancy, the sun had dipped below the horizon. I sat at the small table inside the RV, staring at the book in front of me, filled with old tales of ghost sightings and strange disappearances, most of them from around here. The locals called it the Phantom of the Mines, a shadowy creature that haunted the valleys, stalking anyone who got too close to the abandoned shafts. I flipped through the pages, skimming over accounts of miners swearing they'd seen something dark moving in the fog just before disaster struck. I shook my head and closed the book. Ghosts, shadows. It was all nonsense. Laura would have laughed at the idea. She'd never been scared of anything. Not the woods, not the wild. She was fearless. But I wasn't Laura. As I cleaned up, the RV's lights flickered. I paused, glancing at the ceiling. The lights steadied again, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Just a glitch, I told myself. The RV was old. Things broke. But the air suddenly felt colder. When I glanced out the window, I swore I saw movement, something shifting in the darkness just beyond the headlights. I stepped outside, the crunch of gravel under my boots the only sound. The night was still. Too still. The kind of quiet that presses down on you. I scanned the area, the beam from my flashlight cutting through the shadows. Nothing moved. Just rocks, dirt, and the skeletal remains of the old mining camp. Then I heard it. Faint. Like the sound of gravel shifting underfoot. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. "Get a grip, Jake," I muttered. "It's just the wind." I turned back toward the RV, ready to call it a night, until I saw them. Handprints. Long streaks of dust trailing down the windows, as if someone or something had dragged their fingers across the glass. My heart skipped a beat. I was alone. I knew that. No one had passed me on the road for hours. No one was out here. At least, no one should have been. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The RV felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as the wind outside picked up, howling through the narrow canyon. I sat at the table, staring at the window, waiting, but nothing happened. The next morning, the RV was completely dead. No power, no lights, no water pump, nothing. I checked the battery. It was completely drained. It didn't make sense. I had it checked before I left. It was supposed to last for weeks. Frustrated, I spent most of the day trying to figure out what was wrong, but everything seemed fine. The battery had just died. By late afternoon, I gave up. I was stuck here for the night. I cursed under my breath. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just bad luck. I decided to go for a walk, maybe clear my head. The old mine shaft loomed in the distance, and I made my way toward it. The ground was hard and cracked, littered with strange deep marks crisscrossing the dirt. They looked like they'd been dragged by something large. Too large. At the mine's entrance, the air was cooler, thick with the smell of dust and rot. The opening had collapsed years ago, the rocks jagged and sharp. But there, in the dirt, were more of those strange marks, long, deep gouges, like something had been clawing its way out. I backed away, chest tightening. It was just a mine, just old rocks and dirt. But as I turned to leave, I caught something in the corner of my eye, a shadow moving at the edge of the rocks. I whipped around, nothing. I ran back to the RV, heart pounding. That night, the first knock came just after midnight, a loud, deliberate bang on the side of the RV. I shot up, grabbing the shotgun by my bed. My hands shook as I loaded it. Another bang, closer this time. "Who's there?" I shouted, voice cracking. No answer, just the sound of gravel shifting. I grabbed the flashlight and threw open the door. The cold hit me hard. The beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. No one. But then I saw it. A dark, shifting figure at the edge of the rocks. Its form flickered like smoke in the wind. It didn't have a face, but I felt its eyes on me. I raised the shotgun and fired. The blast echoed, but the thing didn't move. It just faded. I stumbled back inside, locking the door. The lights flickered and then went dark. I sat in total blackness, shotgun in my lap, waiting. But it didn't come back. By morning, I'd had enough. I packed up and climbed into the driver's seat. Miraculously, the RV started like nothing had been wrong. I didn't wait. I hit the gas, speeding away from Dead Man's Gulch. The weight in the air lifted, the fog was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling I had narrowly escaped something dark, something still waiting in those mines. And as I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, just in case. My name's Ronald Lopez, and this happened back in 1996 in the thick pine stretches of Idaho's Payette National Forest. Now, I'm not some storytelling type, but when you've seen what I've seen, it sits with you whether you want it to or not. I've been with the Forest Service nearly a decade, mostly search and rescue, but I don't really get a thrill out of finding folks lost off the trails. It's just a job, you know? Pays the bills and keeps my folks from worrying too much. But this wasn't a typical day at work. The call came in just past noon. 2 teenagers had gone missing around Lake Cascade while hiking, and their mom swore up and down that they wouldn't have wandered off the marked trails. Typical, I thought. Parents always claim their kids are not the type to take risks, and they end up climbing a cliffside or venturing miles off the paths. I radioed in, grabbed my pack, and met up with my buddy Matt Taylor at the ranger station. We'd handled plenty of search missions together, so we had our system down pat. By the time we started the hike, the sun was a half-hearted glow behind thick clouds, casting a dim grayness over the woods. We headed up the main trail, our boots crunching over the underbrush and fallen pine needles. I remember making some wisecrack about the kids probably sitting by the lake with no cell signal, blissfully unaware of the mini panic they'd sparked. Matt chuckled and responded with something about making up for our overtime with the stash of cold beers back at the station. Just another day on the job, so I thought. It wasn't long before we hit signs of trouble. About a mile up, we found what looked like a small campsite. A few scattered granola bar wrappers, a disposable camera, and a dirty sweatshirt lying next to a patch of trampled ferns. But there was something off about the setup. It didn't feel like kids were lounging around here. It felt more like someone had run through. The air was heavy, and I could smell this rank, earthy stench that was wrong for the forest. Matt raised an eyebrow at me, like he was feeling it too. We called out a few times, half expecting the teens to stumble out of the bushes, embarrassed and red-faced, but nothing stirred except a few startled birds in that eerie silence that fills the gaps where sounds should be. I knelt down, trying to get a sense of what had gone down here. There was a sharp imprint in the dirt, something like a claw mark, but wider and deeper than any animal I'd seen in these woods. I brushed my fingers over it, feeling the jagged lines. Whatever made that wasn't anything natural. "You seeing this?" I asked. Matt had spotted something farther up, a chunk of what looked like torn fabric caught on a low-hanging branch. It was a piece of a t-shirt, stained dark, likely blood. I felt a chill settle over me then, a realization that whatever was out here wasn't just a wild animal. We both knew when to trust our gut, and my gut was screaming that we were in over our heads. We pressed on, calling their names, but now every rustle in the bushes had me glancing over my shoulder. About a mile deeper into the woods, we found the first body. It was one of the teens, a boy, face down with his arm twisted under him at an unnatural angle. His body was mangled in a way that no mountain lion or bear would have done. His torso was scratched open, not by claws, but by something else. Something that seemed to tear rather than slash. Matt stepped back, a grimace on his face, muttering something I didn't quite catch. We checked for signs of life, even though it was obvious we'd be wasting our time. He was gone. Worse yet, the terror etched onto his face told us this was no accident, no animal mishap. It was a hunt. We radioed back to the station, giving as calm a report as we could manage. They told us to stay put. Backup was on the way. But Matt and I exchanged a look. Sitting still in the woods with God knows what lurking around? Not likely. We agreed to find higher ground and keep watch until help arrived, but something told me that wouldn't be enough. Just as we started back toward a nearby ridge, we heard a faint sound, a low, uneven clicking, like stones scraping together. It was rhythmic and unnatural, like it had intent behind it. Matt raised his flashlight, sweeping it in a wide arc. I followed his beam, and for a moment we saw nothing but trees and shadows. Then, between two thick pines, a shape appeared. It was unlike anything I'd seen, like a mix between a lizard and something much larger. It moved low to the ground, with a long, scaly body and limbs that looked almost human in shape, though bent and twisted in a way that no human could ever walk. Its skin was dark and rough, patched with what looked like scales. But the strangest part was its head, elongated with a wide, flat mouth and jagged rows of what I can only describe as crocodile-like teeth. Matt and I froze. The thing paused, raising its head as if it sensed us. Then, with a sharp hiss, it lunged forward. I didn't have time to think. My instincts took over, and I yanked Matt to the side just as it shot past us, swiping the air with a clawed arm. We bolted up the ridge, tripping over roots and rocks in our haste. But it was on us, relentless, snapping its jaws and thrashing the underbrush with every step. I remember yelling at Matt to split off, hoping to confuse it or at least buy us some time. He hesitated, but the look on my face must have convinced him, and he veered off to the left. I dove to the right, dodging trees and scrambling up a small incline. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the forest, tearing at anything in its path. There was no mercy, no pause. It was like it had locked onto us, hungry and unyielding. I lost track of Matt in the chaos, my mind racing as I looked for any place to hide. I spotted a small crevice between two rocks and dove in, pressing myself flat against the earth, hoping it would lose my scent. But then I heard the unmistakable sound of Matt's scream cutting through the forest. It was short, choked off, and I knew he'd met the same fate as the teenager back at the campsite. The clicking sound grew fainter, and I dared to lift my head. My legs were numb, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. But the forest around me was silent again. I stayed hidden for what felt like hours, watching the trees, waiting for any sign of movement. When I was sure it was safe, I crawled out, my legs unsteady, and started the long trek back to the station alone. When I returned to the ranger station, the backup was just arriving. They looked at me like I'd gone mad when I tried to explain what happened. They asked about Matt, and I told them the truth, as much as they would believe. We went back out to search, but we only found remnants, torn pieces of clothing, broken branches, and drag marks leading deeper into the forest. No sign of Matt, no bodies, nothing to prove what we'd seen except my own word. Months later, I did some digging, trying to find any hint of what that creature was. Local legend spoke of a predator, something that roamed these woods centuries ago, rumored to be a guardian or a curse, depending on who you asked. They called it the Leshy, a name whispered by those who claimed to have seen it before vanishing into the wilderness. They said it only showed itself to those who dared to encroach on its territory too far, too boldly, as if it needed to remind us that we were still trespassers here. That creature, it wasn't just hunting, it was sending a message loud and clear. My name is Brian Patel, and back in 2016, I found myself deep in the heart of Montana's Glacier National Park. I'd always been an outdoor enthusiast, spending my weekends hiking trails and exploring the wilderness. That summer, my buddy Trevor and I decided to tackle the Highline Trail, a 15-mile trek known for its stunning vistas and challenging terrain. We arrived at the park early in the morning, the sun just beginning to cast a warm glow over the rugged mountains. Trevor cracked a joke about us being the next Granite Grizzlies, a nickname we'd given ourselves after one too many camping trips. I laughed, adjusting my backpack. If we see any actual grizzlies, you can be the one to hug them, I shot back. As we set off, the trail was everything we hoped for, towering cliffs on one side and sheer drops on the other. We passed a few fellow hikers, sharing nods and smiles. One older gentleman warned us about loose rocks ahead. "Thanks for the heads up," Trevor replied. "We'll make sure not to lose our footing. Gravity's got enough victims already." About 5 miles in, we reached a fork in the path. The main trail continued forward, but a narrower, less trodden path veered off to the left. A weathered sign pointed left, labeled Swift Creek Overlook. Trevor raised an eyebrow. "Feel like taking the road less traveled?" "Why not?" I shrugged. "Could be an adventure. Besides, maybe we'll find that pot of gold everyone's always talking about." We turned onto the smaller trail, and the atmosphere subtly shifted. The sounds of distant hikers faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The canopy overhead grew denser, filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. After another mile, we stumbled upon an abandoned ranger station. It was a small, rustic cabin with a collapsed porch and windows clouded by dust and time. "Looks like fixer-upper material," Trevor quipped. "Think they'd mind if we moved in?" "Sure," I said, "as long as you're okay with the wildlife roommates. Rent's probably cheap." Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to take a quick look inside. The door creaked loudly as we pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, carrying hints of mildew and aged wood. A desk sat against one wall, papers strewn across it as if someone had left in a hurry. Trevor picked up a faded photograph from the desk. It showed a group of rangers posing proudly in front of the very cabin we stood in. "Wonder what happened here," he mused. "Maybe they got tired of the decor," I suggested. "Or perhaps the commute was killer." As we left the cabin, I noticed something odd. A series of deep scratches gouged into the wooden exterior, almost like claw marks. I pointed them out to Trevor. "Think we've got a big cat around?" He examined the marks. "Could be. Mountain lions are known to roam these parts. Adds a little excitement, don't you think?" "Just what I needed," I said. "A reason to keep my head on a swivel." We continued along the trail, which grew narrower and more overgrown. The underbrush thickened, and the sounds of wildlife became more pronounced. Birds chirped intermittently, and the distant call of an unknown animal echoed through the trees. "Ever feel like you're being watched?" Trevor asked, only half joking. "All the time. It's my natural charisma," I replied with a smirk. We reached a clearing where the trees parted to reveal a breathtaking view of a waterfall, cascading into a crystalline pool below. "Now that's worth the hike," I said. Trevor was about to respond when he froze, his eyes fixed on something across the clearing. "Did you see that?" "See what?" I followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual. "I thought I saw movement, something big." "Maybe it's your ego manifesting physically," I teased. He chuckled nervously. "Yeah, maybe." We decided to take a short break, sitting on a fallen log and munching on trail mix. I pulled out my map to check our location. "According to this, the Swift Creek Overlook should be just ahead." "Great," Trevor said. "I can't wait to update my social media with some envy-inducing photos." As we packed up to leave, a sudden rustling in the bushes behind us made us both turn sharply. A deer burst out, darting across the clearing at breakneck speed. Guess we're not the only ones enjoying the great outdoors, I said. But then we heard another sound, a low, guttural noise that defied easy description. It was unlike any animal call I'd ever heard. What was that? Trevor whispered. I shook my head. Probably just the wind, or your stomach complaining about that gas station burrito. He didn't laugh. Maybe we should head back. Come on, we're almost to the overlook. Don't tell me you're scared. He hesitated, but then nodded. All right, but let's keep moving. We pressed on, but the forest seemed to grow darker despite the still high sun. The trees towered over us, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. The path was barely visible now, more of a suggestion than a trail. Another sound pierced the silence, a snapping branch, closer this time. We both stopped. Brian, maybe we should turn around, Trevor said, his voice tense. All right. Maybe this was a bad idea, I admitted. We started back the way we came, picking up our pace. The forest, which had felt so welcoming earlier, now seemed oppressive. Every shadow looked like it was concealing something. Suddenly, Trevor tripped and fell hard. I rushed to help him up. You okay? Yeah, just twisted my ankle, I think. Can you walk? He tested his weight. It's not great, but I can manage. As we resumed our hurried retreat, a chilling howl echoed through the trees. It was close, too close. That's no mountain lion, I said quietly. Keep moving, Trevor urged. We broke into a limping jog. The path was nearly impossible to follow, and in our panic, we veered off into uncharted territory. Without warning, a massive figure burst from the foliage, blocking our path. It stood on all fours, covered in thick, matted fur. Its body was like that of a wolf, but far larger, easily the size of a bear. Saliva dripped from its maw, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Run, I shouted. We bolted in the opposite direction, adrenaline overriding Trevor's injury. The creature let out a bone-chilling snarl and gave chase. Dodging trees and leaping over roots, we ran blindly through the forest. Behind us, the thunderous footsteps of the beast grew louder. I could hear its heavy breathing, feel the ground shake with each stride. Trevor stumbled again, and this time the creature was upon him before I could react. It swiped at him with a massive paw, sending him crashing into a tree. Blood spattered across the leaves. Trevor, I screamed. I looked around frantically for anything to use as a weapon. Spotting a broken branch, I grabbed it and swung at the beast. The makeshift club struck its side, but seemed to do little more than annoy it. The creature turned its attention to me, its eyes locking onto mine. In a desperate bid, I threw a rock at its head. It flinched, giving me a split second to act. I rushed to Trevor's side. He was conscious but badly injured. We have to go, I urged. He grimaced. I can't. You have to get out of here. Not a chance, I said, hoisting him up. The beast shook off its momentary distraction and advanced slowly, almost as if savoring the hunt. Thinking quickly, I remembered the flare gun in my backpack, a safety measure I'd almost forgotten. I yanked it out, aimed at the creature, and fired. The flare struck its shoulder, erupting in a burst of light and sparks. The beast recoiled, letting out a pained howl. Seizing the opportunity, I half-dragged, half-carried Trevor as we made a desperate escape. We stumbled upon a narrow ravine, a gap too wide to jump, but with a fallen log bridging the sides. Go, Trevor urged. Together, we scrambled across the log. Midway, the beast reappeared at the ravine's edge, eyes glowing with fury. It started across the log behind us. Once we reached the other side, I pulled out a lighter from my pocket. Keep going, I yelled to Trevor. I set fire to the dry brush at our end of the log. Flames licked up the wood just as the creature was halfway across. It hesitated, but its momentum carried it forward. The fire weakened the log's structure, and with a loud crack, it snapped. The beast plunged into the ravine below, disappearing into the darkness. Breathing heavily, we didn't wait to see if it would resurface. We pushed onward until we broke through the tree line and stumbled onto a park ranger's station, this one occupied. The rangers sprang into action upon seeing us. What happened? One demanded. Some kind of animal attacked us, I managed to say between gasps. They called for medical assistance and alerted their teams. Trevor was taken to a nearby hospital, and I accompanied him in the ambulance. In the following days, park officials searched the area but found no trace of the creature. They did, however, discover remains from hikers reported missing over the past year. The authorities speculated about a rogue bear, but I knew that wasn't the case. Trevor underwent surgery but pulled through. When I visited him, he tried to lighten the mood. "Guess we won't be making the cover of Outdoor magazine after all," he joked weakly. "Maybe not," I replied, "but we've got one heck of a story to tell." In the aftermath, the park officials decided to close off the Swift Creek Overlook Trail indefinitely. They cited unsafe conditions and potential wildlife hazards. As for the creature, theories abounded. A previously unknown species, a misidentified bear, even whispers of local legends come to life. Whatever it was, it remained a mystery. The experience didn't deter me from the outdoors, but it did teach me a valuable lesson about respecting the unpredictability of nature. My name's Dylan Gonzalez, and in 2013, I took my RV to a spot near Kenai Fjords National Park in Alaska. I'm not a survivalist or a wilderness guide. I'm an accountant from Atlanta who got fed up with numbers and paperwork. So I figured I'd finally hit pause on life and spend a couple of weeks camping. I drove all the way from Georgia, chasing the quiet, thinking Alaska would be the kind of place where I could just sit back with a beer and let my brain go blank for a while. When I parked the RV in this isolated area just outside the national park, it felt perfect. Not a single person around. I was miles from the nearest campground, let alone a neighbor. And to me, that was ideal. I was setting up my little oasis when I noticed a couple of things off the bat that didn't sit right. The first was the absence of wildlife. I mean, it's Alaska, bears, moose, the whole lot. But around me, nothing. No scat on the ground, no broken branches from animals passing by, just silence, except for the faint rustling of leaves. By day 3, I'd settled into a good routine. Coffee in the morning, a short hike in the woods, then I'd grill up whatever canned meal I felt like eating. It was on one of these afternoon hikes that I stumbled across an old, half-collapsed wooden cabin. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The door was hanging off the hinges, and there was this strange smell around it. A mix of rotting wood and something sharper, kind of metallic. I figured it was rust from some old tool or metal scrap inside, so I brushed it off. But something didn't sit right with me. There were bits of clothing scattered around the area. Shirts, old jackets, even a pair of jeans. Looked like they'd been there for years, frayed and faded by the weather. I don't know why, but I felt a chill. Part of me thought I should turn back, but another part, maybe the accountant side that just needs answers, thought I should go inside and take a look around. The interior was even worse. Dirt was caked on every surface. The floor was covered in what looked like animal bones, small ones, maybe birds or rabbits. And that same metallic smell was stronger now. I looked up and noticed something hanging from the ceiling. It was a hook, the kind you'd see in butcher shops. It didn't belong there, not in the middle of a forest. But it was there all the same, swaying slightly as if disturbed by some breeze that I couldn't feel. At that point, I decided to head back to the RV. I figured it was best to keep my distance from whatever strange things were left behind in that place. But when I stepped out of the cabin, I could have sworn I heard footsteps, faint and dragging behind me. I stopped, turned around, and waited. But nothing appeared. The forest around me was dead silent again. Back at the RV, I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I just psyched myself out. That night, though, I barely slept. I had brought a shotgun with me just in case of wildlife, and I kept it by my side. Every little noise outside felt amplified, like something was creeping around just out of sight. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Morning came, and I felt a bit stupid. I decided to spend the day fishing in a small creek I'd passed earlier, trying to distract myself. But even out by the water, that eerie silence remained. No birds chirping, no fish biting, just the occasional snap of a twig somewhere behind me, which I tried my best to ignore. The thought that maybe I wasn't alone out here crept up more than once, and I started questioning if maybe I'd made a mistake coming out this far. Then, later that evening, as I was grilling up some fish, I caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye, just on the edge of the tree line. I squinted, trying to make out what I was seeing, but all I could make out was a figure. A man, maybe, crouching low, watching me. He was dressed in what looked like layers upon layers of dirty clothes, all torn up and mud-streaked, his face partially obscured by a tangle of hair. He was still as a statue, just watching. I shouted out to him, trying to play it cool, asking if he was lost, but he didn't respond. Instead, he slowly ducked back into the trees, disappearing without a sound. Every instinct told me I needed to pack up and leave. But stubborn as I was, I convinced myself that he was probably just some harmless drifter. I thought if I ignored him, he'd go away. The next night, things escalated. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a scraping noise coming from outside. It was a slow, dragging sound, like something was being pulled along the side of the RV. I froze, gripping the shotgun tighter than ever, listening. The scraping moved along the length of the vehicle, stopping right outside the window next to my bed. I didn't dare look out. For a solid hour, I just lay there, sweating, listening to the faint scratching on the metal. Then, silence. I finally drifted off, hoping I'd imagined the whole thing. But in the morning, when I stepped outside, there were muddy handprints smeared along the side of the RV. That was enough for me. I started packing up my stuff, thinking I'd head back to the main road and find a new spot, maybe closer to a town. But as I loaded the last of my things, I spotted him again, standing a few yards away by a cluster of birch trees, staring at me with this blank, almost curious expression. He was holding a long, rusty blade, one that looked like it had seen far too much use, and his clothes were even filthier than before. I didn't think. I raised the shotgun and aimed at him, shouting for him to stay back. He just smiled, a slow, unsettling grin, and started to walk toward me, dragging that blade along the ground. I fired a warning shot into the air, hoping he'd take the hint. But he kept coming, unfazed, picking up speed. At that moment, I knew I couldn't just wait around. I ran back into the RV, locked the door, and fired up the engine. But the man lunged at the driver's side window, slamming his fist against it, that rusty blade scraping along the glass. I stomped on the gas, swerving as he clung to the side, banging on the window, his face pressed against it with that same terrifying smile. The RV lurched forward, finally throwing him off balance, and I sped down the dirt road, not daring to look back. After what felt like an eternity, I hit the highway, my heart still pounding. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station miles away, where I could finally breathe. The police in Anchorage were polite but skeptical. They took down my statement and checked out the muddy handprints on the RV, but all they could offer was a half-hearted promise to patrol the area. They didn't even sound like they believed me. Later, out of curiosity, or maybe just out of fear, I did some digging. I found a couple of stories about a man named Gideon, who was known to lurk in those woods. Rumored to be some kind of deranged hermit who'd lived there for decades, people said he'd lost his family in a hunting accident and went off the deep end, becoming obsessed with cleansing the forest of outsiders. My name is Alexander Wagner, and I'm 33 years old. I'm a wildlife biologist and an avid camper. I've always preferred the solitude of the woods to the chaos of city life. But what happened to me last October in Shade State Park changed the way I look at the wilderness forever. I wasn't just alone out there. I was being hunted. I'd just gone through a messy breakup and needed an escape. Shade State Park seemed like the perfect place to clear my head and refocus on my work. I had an article deadline looming about the biodiversity in Indiana state parks, and I figured a few nights in the woods would give me the peace I needed to write. I arrived on a Friday afternoon, parking my RV in one of the more secluded campsites near the edge of the park. The spot was surrounded by tall trees, their leaves starting to turn shades of orange and gold. A narrow ravine cut through the area, and the soft gurgle of a distant creek was the only sound as I set up my gear. I realized I'd forgotten to pack extra batteries for my flashlight. Amateur mistake, I muttered to myself. Still, I shrugged it off, figuring my phone's light would suffice if needed. I was more concerned about the thick fog rolling in. It clung to the ground, making the woods feel unnervingly still. That night, as I sat by the fire, I heard it for the first time, faint crying drifting through the trees. It sounded like a child, soft and pitiful. I froze, listening, my heart pounding. It wasn't unusual to hear strange noises in the woods, but this was different. The sound tugged at something deep inside me, like an instinct I couldn't ignore. "Hello?" I called, standing and shining my phone's light into the trees. The crying stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence behind. My gut told me to stay put, but I couldn't shake the nagging thought that someone might need help. Grabbing my phone and a jacket, I ventured a few steps into the woods. "Is someone there?" I called again, my voice trembling. No answer, just the rustling of leaves as a light breeze picked up. After a few minutes of searching, I gave up and headed back to the RV, trying to convince myself it was just an animal. The next morning, I met Ranger Neil. He was making his rounds and stopped by my campsite to chat. He was in his 40s with a weathered face and a calm demeanor. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat. "You out here all alone?" "Yeah," I replied, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "I'm a biologist doing some research." "Ah, well, be careful," he said, glancing at the fog still clinging to the trees. "Shade's got its quirks. Folks around here like to tell stories about the crying woods." I raised an eyebrow. "The crying woods?" "Old legend," he said, leaning on his truck. "Back in the 30s, a little girl went missing out here. Family never found her. Some say you can still hear her crying, trying to lead people into the woods. Thing is, those who follow the sound don't always come back." I laughed nervously. "That's unsettling." Neil gave me a long, serious look. "Just stay on the trails, all right?" I nodded, but his words stuck with me. That day, I decided to explore a few trails and take notes for my article. The woods were beautiful in the daylight, full of vibrant colors and the earthy smell of fallen leaves. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. About an hour into my hike, I noticed footprints on the trail. They were small, like a child's, and barefoot. I stopped, frowning. What kind of parent lets their kid wander around here without shoes? The prints veered off the trail, disappearing into the dense underbrush. I crouched down to take a closer look. The edges of the prints were fresh, the soil still slightly damp. A chill ran down my spine. I stood quickly, deciding it was time to head back to the RV. That night, the crying returned. It started softly, just beyond the edge of the campsite. This time, it didn't stop when I called out. Instead, it grew louder, more desperate. "Help me," a small voice whimpered. My heart raced as I peered out the RV window. In the dim firelight, I saw her, a girl no older than 8, standing at the edge of the trees. She was barefoot, wearing a dirty white dress, her hair tangled and wild. She was crying, her shoulders shaking. "Hey," I called, grabbing my jacket. "Are you okay?" The girl looked up, and for a moment our eyes met. Her face was pale, her cheeks streaked with tears, but her eyes, they were hollow, dark as the void. Before I could react, she turned and ran into the woods. "Wait!" I shouted, chasing after her. The fog swallowed me as I stumbled through the trees, calling for the girl. The crying grew fainter, pulling me deeper and deeper into the woods. My phone's light barely cut through the haze, and the trees seemed to close in around me. Finally, I stopped, gasping for breath. The crying had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. I turned in a slow circle, realizing I had no idea where I was. My stomach sank. Then I saw it, a small, crumbling cabin hidden among the trees. The door hung crookedly on its hinges, and the windows were broken. I approached cautiously, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but curiosity won out. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of damp wood and decay. Dust motes floated in the dim light as I stepped over broken furniture and shattered glass. On a table in the corner, I found a stack of old newspapers, yellowed with age. My breath caught as I read the headline, "Local Girl Missing in Shade State Park." The date was from 1937. Beneath the article was a photograph of the girl. It was her, the same girl I'd seen in the woods. As I skimmed the article, a detail jumped out at me. The The girl had been suspected of pushing her younger brother into a ravine shortly before her disappearance. She claimed it was an accident, but witnesses reported hearing the siblings arguing moments before the tragedy. A sudden sound made me whirl around. The crying had returned, louder now, echoing through the cabin. My hands shook as I backed toward the door. When I stepped outside, the girl was there, standing at the edge of the ravine. Her crying stopped as she turned to face me. Her hollow eyes locked onto mine. "Why did you leave me?" she whispered, her voice laced with anger. "I didn't," I stammered, my throat dry. "I'm here to help." She took a step closer, and her face twisted. Her mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. Her eyes began to bleed, dark streaks running down her pale cheeks. "You'll stay with me," she said, her voice a distorted growl. The ground beneath me trembled, and I realized too late that I was standing at the edge of the ravine. Roots and dirt crumbled under my feet as the girl lunged at me, her hands clawing at my arms. I screamed, swinging my phone at her. The light catching her face, she recoiled, hissing like an animal, and vanished into the fog. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the forest floor, shaking uncontrollably. I don't know how I made it back to the RV. The walk was a blur, my mind racing with what I'd just seen. When I finally locked myself inside, I collapsed onto the bed, clutching my knees to my chest. As I drove out of the park the next morning, I heard the crying one last time, faint and distant. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her standing in the road, watching me leave. I haven't gone back to Shade State Park since, but sometimes, late at night, I hear a child crying outside my window, and I know she's still waiting for me. This story highlights the chilling lure of a malevolent spirit preying on empathy and curiosity to trap its victims. I woke up that morning with a sense of unease. Something about the quiet was off. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes your heart pound a little harder. My name's Gregory, and I'd driven out to the middle of nowhere in an RV hoping to get some peace and quiet. Life had been a series of endless loops, a carousel of monotony that I desperately needed to step off. The campsite was perfect, nestled in the thick woods of northern Michigan. It was isolated enough that you couldn't hear any traffic, just the occasional chirp of birds and the rustle of leaves. I had my chair set up by the fire pit, and the coffee was brewing on the small stove inside the RV. My routine started with a morning hike. The path I'd chosen was well-trodden but still wild, the kind where you could easily believe you were the first person to step foot there in years. As I wandered deeper into the forest, the sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows on the ground. The air was fresh with that earthy smell that only a forest can have. I was about an hour into my hike when I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin. It was the kind of place you see in horror movies, but there was something oddly compelling about it. The door hung off its hinges, and the windows were shattered, giving it a skeletal look. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a closer look. The inside of the cabin was covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. Old furniture was strewn about, and papers littered the floor. I bent down to pick up a yellowed piece of paper, which seemed to be a letter. It was hard to make out the faded ink, but the words "help" and "trapped" were unmistakable. Suddenly, a noise from outside caught my attention. It was a low rustling, like something or someone was moving through the underbrush. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I quickly stuffed the letter into my pocket. Stepping outside, I looked around but saw nothing. The forest was eerily quiet again. I decided it was time to head back to the RV. The uneasy feeling had returned, stronger than before. As I retraced my steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I sped up my pace, eager to get back to the safety of my campsite. When I arrived, I found the RV door slightly ajar. I was sure I had closed it before leaving. My heart pounded in my chest as I cautiously stepped inside. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but then I noticed the coffee pot was smashed on the floor and the contents of my backpack were scattered around. Someone had been here. I grabbed the hunting knife I always kept in the RV and stepped back outside, scanning the area for any signs of movement. The woods around me seemed to close in, the trees looming like silent sentinels. That's when I saw him, a man standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me. He was tall and gaunt, with wild hair and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. His clothes were tattered, and his eyes were fixed on me with a disturbing intensity. "Who are you?" I shouted, gripping the knife tighter. He didn't respond, just stood there staring. Then, slowly, he turned and disappeared into the woods. I felt a surge of anger and fear. Who the hell was this guy, and what did he want? I wasn't about to let some creep ruin my escape from reality. I decided to follow him, keeping my distance, but staying close enough to keep him in sight. The man moved quickly through the forest, almost as if he knew it, like the back of his hand. I struggled to keep up, branches slapping against my face and thorns scratching my arms. After what felt like hours, we arrived at another clearing, this one dominated by a large, ominous-looking structure. It was an old warehouse, abandoned and overgrown with ivy. The man slipped inside through a broken window, and I cautiously followed. The interior of the warehouse was dark and musty. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. I could hear the sound of footsteps echoing off the walls. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw him again, standing at the far end of the room. "Why are you following me?" he asked, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I should be asking you the same thing," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "What do you want from me?" He let out a low, humorless laugh. "You shouldn't have come here. This place isn't for people like you." I felt a surge of defiance. "And what exactly is this place?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked deeper into the warehouse. I hesitated for a moment before following him. We navigated through a maze of corridors and rooms, each one more dilapidated than the last. Finally, we arrived at a large open space that seemed to be some sort of makeshift living quarters. There were makeshift beds, old furniture, and even a small stove. "Welcome to my home," he said with a hint of sarcasm. "I've been living here for years." "Ever since I disappeared," he added. "Disappeared?" I asked, confused. "Yeah, disappeared, like all those people you read about in the papers. Just vanished without a trace. Only I didn't vanish. I chose to live off the grid, away from society." I started to piece it together. This guy was one of those missing persons you hear about on the news, the ones who vanish and are never found. But he had chosen this life for reasons I couldn't understand. "Why?" I asked. "Why live like this?" He looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. "Because society is broken. People are selfish, cruel, and deceitful. Out here, I'm free. I don't have to answer to anyone." "But you're not free," I argued. "You're trapped here, just like that letter said." His eyes flashed with anger. "You read the letter?" "Yeah, I did. Someone was asking for help." "Who was it?" He laughed again, a harsh, bitter sound. "That was me, a long time ago. I thought I wanted to be found, but then I realized I was better off alone." I felt a chill run through me. This guy was clearly unhinged. I needed to get out of there, and fast. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I'll just go, and we can both pretend this never happened." He shook his head. "I can't let you do that. You know too much." Before I could react, he lunged at me, knocking the knife out of my hand. We struggled, rolling across the dirty floor. He was stronger than he looked, and I was quickly overpowered. He pinned me down, his hand closing around my throat. I gasped for air, my vision starting to blur. In a desperate move, I reached for a nearby piece of broken glass and slashed at his arm. He screamed in pain and released his grip. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the knife and running for the exit. I could hear him behind me, cursing and stumbling. I burst out of the warehouse and into the forest, running as fast as I could. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare slow down. I could hear his footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I broke through the trees and into the clearing where my RV was parked. I didn't stop until I was inside, locking the door behind me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hand shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons. 911, what's your emergency?" the operator asked. "There's a man. He's trying to kill me," I gasped. "Stay calm, sir. Where are you?" I gave them my location, praying they would get here in time. I could hear the man outside banging on the door and shouting. I grabbed the hunting rifle I kept in the RV, loading it with trembling hands. The banging stopped, and everything went silent. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. Minutes felt like hours. Then I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Relief washed over me as I saw the flashing lights of the police cars approaching. The officers quickly surrounded the RV, weapons drawn. I opened the door, hands raised, and they rushed in, securing the area. They found the man a short distance away, bleeding and delirious. He was taken into custody and later identified as Leonard Bain, a man who had been missing for over a decade. The police found evidence of his crimes in the warehouse, the remains of several missing persons who had met a gruesome end at his hands. The story made headlines, and I was hailed as a hero for helping to bring him to justice. As the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The forest, which had once been a place of solace, now felt like a place of nightmares. I knew I'd never come back here, but I couldn't forget what happened. Leonard Bain had chosen his isolation, but it had driven him to madness, and I had stumbled into his dark world by chance. The authorities cleaned up the site, and the remains were identified and returned to their families. Life went on, but I was forever changed by that encounter. The scars on my neck were a constant reminder of how close I'd come to death. In the end, I realized that sometimes the monsters we fear aren't hiding in the dark. They're right there in plain sight, wearing the face of a man who just wanted to be left alone. And sometimes the only way to survive is to fight back, no matter how terrifying the odds. My name is Lila Carter, and I'm 35 years old. I'm a middle school teacher from Indiana. This happened in May of last year during a solo camping trip at Potato Creek State Park. At the time, I thought I just needed a weekend away, some time to decompress after the chaos of the school year. But what I found out there wasn't peace. It was something I don't think I'll ever truly escape. I arrived on a Friday afternoon, late enough that the sun was already starting to sink behind the trees. Potato Creek is beautiful, with wide open lakes and dense forest trails that seem to stretch forever. I parked my old RV at the site near the water and set up my little camp. A folding chair by the fire pit, my journal, and pens on the picnic table. It wasn't much, but it was all I needed. The first issue popped up almost immediately. The generator on my RV wouldn't stay on for more than a few minutes before sputtering out. I cursed under my breath. Without it, I wouldn't have power for lights or to charge my phone. I reminded myself I'd come here to unplug anyway and shrugged it off. As I was unpacking, I noticed something odd. A deer stood at the edge of the woods, staring directly at me. That wasn't unusual in itself, but the way it stood there, perfectly still like a statue, sent a ripple of unease through me. When I waved my arms to scare it off, it didn't flinch. It just turned its head slightly as if trying to understand me, then disappeared into the trees. I tried not to think about it as I made dinner. Night fell quickly, bringing a heavy silence with it. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just stillness. It was unsettling. I sat by the fire, staring into the flames, and that's when I heard that whistling. It was faint at first, just a few notes carried by the breeze. I assumed it was another camper, but when I strained my ears, I realized it wasn't coming from the nearby sites. It was coming from deep in the woods. I don't know why, but the sound unsettled me. I went inside the RV and locked the door. When I checked my phone, I saw that I had no signal. Not surprising, given how remote the area was. I tried to sleep, but my dreams were strange that night. I kept hearing someone whispering my name over and over. When I finally woke up, drenched in sweat, I realized the RV door was slightly ajar. My heart nearly stopped. I was certain I'd locked it before going to bed. The next morning, I decided to shake off the weirdness and go for a hike. The fresh air felt good, and I started to relax as I walked the trails. That's when I saw the footprints. They were barefoot, large, but with long, twisted toes, almost like claws. They weren't human, but they weren't animal either. They appeared out of nowhere in the dirt and led off the trail into the dense underbrush. I stood there, staring at them, my gut telling me to turn back, but I shook it off. It's just some weird animal, I told myself. Probably a bear. When I got back to my campsite, I met Jaden. He was camping a few sites down and seemed about my age, mid-30s, with a friendly smile and a bit of a nosy streak. "You camping alone?" he asked, glancing at my RV. I nodded and he raised an eyebrow. "You're braver than me. This place has a weird vibe, you know?" I laughed nervously and tried to brush him off, but he kept talking. "You heard the stories about this area? The Skinwalker legend?" I shook my head, even though the word sent a chill down my spine. I'd heard it before somewhere, but I couldn't remember the details. "It's an old Native American story," Jaden explained. "They say it's a shapeshifter, a spirit that can take the form of anything it wants. People, animals. It mimics voices, tries to lure you into the woods. Once you see it, you're pretty much screwed." He grinned, like it was all a big joke, but I could see the unease in his eyes. "Thanks for the bedtime story," I said dryly, trying to laugh it off, but I couldn't shake the knot forming in my stomach. That night, I heard the whistling again, louder this time. It started faint, like the night before, but it grew closer and closer until it sounded like it was right outside the RV. Then it stopped, replaced by silence. I stayed perfectly still, listening, my heart pounding in my chest. "Lila," a voice called softly. My blood turned to ice. It was my voice. "Lila," it said again, this time with a strange rasping tone. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a flashlight, and crept toward the window. My hands were shaking as I peeked outside. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed something standing just beyond the edge of the firelight. It looked like me, but wrong. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its face twisted into a grotesque grin. I stumbled back, my heart racing. No, I whispered, barely able to breathe. The thing outside started scratching at the RV door, slow and deliberate, the sound making my skin crawl. "Lila, let me in," it said, still using my voice. I didn't sleep that night. I sat huddled in the corner of the RV, clutching the flashlight, jumping at every sound. When the sun finally rose, I dared to open the door. There were long claw marks running down the side of the RV, and my campsite was in disarray. Chairs knocked over, food scattered everywhere. Jaden's campsite was silent. When I went to check on him, his tent was slashed open, and his belongings were strewn about like mine. A dark stain, blood, I realized, marked the ground near the fire pit. I called out for him, but there was no answer. Panic set in. I decided I couldn't stay another night. I needed to leave, but when I tried to start the RV, the engine sputtered and died. I tried again and again, but it was no use. The thing had done something to it. I was sure of it. As I stood there trying to figure out what to do, I heard Jaden's voice calling from the woods. "Lila, over here. I need help." It sounded desperate, terrified. "Jaden?" I called back, my voice trembling. "Where are you?" "Just a little further," his voice replied. I froze. Something about the tone wasn't right. It was too flat, too monotone, and then I remembered what Jaden had said about the skinwalker mimicking voices. My blood ran cold. "I'm not falling for it," I muttered, backing away from the tree line. That's when I saw it. The thing stepped out from the woods. Its body hunched and twisted. It shifted forms right in front of me, going from Jaden to me to something else entirely, something grotesque with long clawed fingers and glowing yellow eyes. It let out a guttural, inhuman screech and started toward me. I ran back into the RV and slammed the door shut just as the creature reached it. It pounded on the sides, the force shaking the whole vehicle. I grabbed a bag of salt from the cupboard. I remembered hearing somewhere that salt could ward off evil spirits, and poured a circle around myself. The pounding stopped. The creature's face appeared at the window, grinning at me with razor-sharp teeth. It snarled, its glowing eyes fixed on mine. "You can't hide forever, Lila," it hissed, its voice a sickening mixture of mine and Jaden's. "I'll see you soon." It disappeared as the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees. I stayed in that circle until I was sure it was gone. When I finally dared to step outside, I saw that the creature had carved something into the hood of the RV. You can't run. I left Potato Creek that morning, abandoning the RV and walking to the nearest ranger station to call for help. They found Jaden's body 2 days later, deep in the woods. His injuries were so horrific that they wouldn't tell me the details. I haven't gone camping since. I don't know if I ever will, but sometimes, late at night, I hear whistling outside my window, and I know it's still out there, waiting for me. My name is Wesley Crane. It's 2015, and I'm sitting in an RV park just outside Yellowstone, wondering how the hell I got here. I'm not really the outdoorsy type, to be honest, but after my divorce last year, I thought it'd be good for me to get away from everything, clear my head, do the whole finding myself thing. I bought an old RV, thinking I'd hit the open road and maybe grow some stubble while pretending to know what I'm doing. I work as an accountant, so my idea of adventure usually involves tax loopholes, not whatever I just went through. To set the stage, I'm parked at this quiet little site, nothing but me, some trees, and the occasional squirrel to keep me company. The park is gorgeous, don't get me wrong, but there's something unnerving about how isolated it feels. You don't realize how much noise there is in a city until you're somewhere like this, where the silence itself is almost loud. I had been camping out for a couple of days already, pretending to enjoy my lukewarms of beans and the lack of decent Wi-Fi when I decided to venture out a little farther than usual. There's this trail that winds up through the woods just past where I parked, a real postcard kind of place. I figured I'd hike for an hour or two, then come back, maybe crack open a beer and convince myself I was becoming a nature guy. The first part of the walk was fine, quiet, peaceful even. There wasn't a soul in sight, which I thought was kind of weird for the height of tourist season, but I figured everyone else had more sense than to hike alone. Then, as I rounded a bend, I saw it. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke, maybe a film set I'd accidentally wandered into. There was an RV, not unlike mine, tucked into a small clearing just off the path, but it was trashed. Not like bear attack trashed, but methodical, almost surgical. Doors hanging off, windows smashed, the roof torn out in places. It didn't look like the kind of damage nature could do. No, this was something more deliberate. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped off the trail to check it out. The closer I got, the more wrong everything felt. It wasn't just the damage, it was the atmosphere. The air felt thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on me. My stomach churned with the kind of unease you can't quite put into words, like you've just remembered something horrible you'd tried to forget. I stopped short of the RV's door, realizing I didn't want to see inside, but by then I'd already seen too much. There was blood, splashes of it across the side of the vehicle, like someone had thrown a bucket of red paint at it. And there was more, drag marks leading from the RV into the woods. It didn't take a genius to know something bad had happened here. I should have turned back right then, sprinted down that trail, and never looked back. But no, like an idiot, I stepped closer. Inside, the place was torn apart, furniture overturned, dishes shattered on the floor, personal belongings scattered everywhere. It was like someone had been living there 1 second, and then suddenly, well, wasn't. The worst part, though, wasn't the blood or the destruction. It was the suitcase. A half-packed suitcase sitting on the bed as if someone had been about to leave but never got the chance. I'm not sure how long I stood there just staring at it, my brain trying to catch up with what I was seeing. Long enough, apparently, for the owner of the RV to come back. It was a sound, a twig snapping behind me, that jolted me out of my stupor. I turned around so fast I nearly tripped over myself, and there he was, standing just a few feet away. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, but that wasn't what set off the alarm bells in my head. It was the look on his face, a kind of calm that didn't belong in a scene like this. He wasn't surprised to see me. In fact, it felt like he'd been expecting me. He stepped closer, too close for comfort, and my mouth went dry. He had this casual way about him, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing and wasn't worried about consequences. His clothes were dirty, but not in the "I've been camping" way. More like, "I've been living out here, away from the law" kind of dirty. "You lost?" His voice was quiet, controlled, not threatening, but definitely not friendly either. I stammered out some excuse about getting off the trail, how I didn't mean to intrude, but the way he looked at me, it was like he could see right through the lies. He glanced at the RV, then back at me, his eyes narrowing just a fraction. I'll tell you this, people talk about fight or flight, but there's a third option they don't always mention: freeze. And that's exactly what I did, like a deer in headlights, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then he smiled, and that's when I knew I was screwed. I don't remember much about what happened next. One second, he was a few feet away, and the next he was on me, hands around my neck, squeezing. I don't even think he was trying to kill me. Not yet, just testing me, like a cat plays with a mouse. I thrashed, managed to elbow him in the ribs, and for a second, his grip loosened just enough for me to get away. I ran blindly, stupidly, crashing through the trees, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps heavy but unhurried, like he knew the woods better than I ever could. The ground was uneven, roots and rocks tripping me up, but I didn't stop, couldn't stop. If I stopped, I was dead. Eventually, I burst back onto the main trail, my lungs on fire, legs shaking like jelly. I half collapsed behind a boulder, trying to quiet my breathing, praying he hadn't followed, but I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, just silence. I don't know how long I stayed there, huddled in that spot, waiting. Time felt strange, stretched out, like I was stuck in some kind of nightmare loop, but he never came. When I finally mustered the courage to move, I bolted back to the RV park, not stopping until I slammed the door of my camper shut behind me. For the next few hours, I sat in silence, too scared to even peek out the windows. But nothing happened. No knocks on the door, no shadowy figure lurking in the trees, just the oppressive weight of everything I'd seen. I don't know why I didn't call the cops right then and there. Maybe part of me didn't believe it really happened, or maybe I was just too damn scared. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the RV made me jump. Every gust of wind had me convinced he was out there, waiting for me to slip up. The next morning, I packed up and left, driving as far and as fast as I could. I didn't look back, not once. A few days later, after I'd put some distance between me and Yellowstone, curiosity got the better of me. I did some digging. Turns out, the guy I ran into had a name: Harvey Dunn, former Marine, dishonorably discharged for reasons that were never made public. He'd gone off the grid about 5 years ago, and there were rumors, ugly ones, about people who'd crossed his path and never been seen again. Authorities had been looking for him, but he was like a ghost, popping up in random places, always just out of reach. The RV I found? It belonged to a couple from Ohio. Their bodies were discovered 2 weeks later, buried not far from where I'd been. So yeah, I got lucky. Real lucky. But Harvey's still out there, and I've got a feeling our paths will cross again. Maybe next time I won't be so lucky. My name is Nicholas Harris, and I'm 57 years old. This happened in the fall of 2022, just after I retired as a forest ranger. I had spent over 30 years in the wilderness patrolling trails, chasing off bears, and sometimes even helping lost hikers find their way back to safety. You'd think a man like me would have no reason to be afraid of the woods, but I'm telling you what I experienced in the Hoare National Forest will haunt me for the rest of my days. I had just bought an old RV, a 1988 Winnebago. Nothing fancy, but it ran well enough. The plan was simple: park it somewhere secluded, spend a few days camping, and finally get the peace I had been craving. My wife, Catherine, used to love trips like this. She passed 5 years ago in a hiking accident, one I couldn't prevent, and I still carry the guilt of it. I thought this trip might help me reconnect with her memory, and maybe even forgive myself. I chose the Sycamore Trail in Hoare National Forest. It's not as busy as some of the other spots, and I knew the land like the back of my hand. The locals had always told stories about the area, warnings to stay away from certain trails, whispers of things that didn't belong in those woods. But I'd always chalked it up to superstition. After all, the forest can play tricks on your mind if you're not used to it. The first day went smoothly enough. I parked the RV in a small clearing just off the trailhead. It was a gorgeous spot, the kind of place Catherine would have loved. There was a crisp chill in the air, and the trees were blazed with autumn colors. I set up camp, got a fire going, and cooked myself a simple meal of canned chili. The only problem was my equipment. My old flashlight was flickering, and my camp stove gave me trouble lighting up. Nothing major, just annoyances, or so I thought. That night, as I sat by the fire, I started to feel off. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on. The woods were quieter than they should have been. No crickets, no owls, not even the rustle of leaves. Just dead silence. Then, just as I was about to head inside the RV, I heard something. Nicholas. It was faint but unmistakable. Someone was calling my name. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. The voice sounded familiar. Too familiar. It sounded like Catherine. Nicholas, help me. The voice was coming from deep in the woods, beyond the reach of my firelight. My heart was racing. I told myself it couldn't be her. It couldn't. But it sounded so real, so desperate. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the darkness. I didn't go far. My flashlight barely worked, and the further I moved from the fire, the darker and colder it got. That's when I saw them. Tracks in the mud. They were strange, like a mix between human footprints and animal paw prints, as if someone had been walking barefoot but with claws. They led in a wide circle around my RV before disappearing into the woods. I stood there staring at the tracks, trying to make sense of them. That's when I heard the voice again, closer this time. Nicholas, please, it hurts. It was Catherine, or at least it sounded like her. Who's there? I shouted, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound tough. The forest didn't answer. I backed away slowly, my flashlight flickering, and retreated to the safety of the RV, locking the door behind me. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe it was a bird mimicking her voice, maybe I was hearing things, but deep down I knew better. The next day, I tried to shake it off. I spent the morning exploring the trail, hoping a good hike would clear my head. The woods were still unnervingly quiet, but nothing unusual happened. By the time I returned to camp, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. That's when the rain started. Light at first, then heavy. I sprained my ankle slipping on the wet ground while fetching firewood, cursing under my breath as I hobbled back to the RV. The storm made the forest even darker, and the flickering flashlight wasn't much help. That night, I heard scratching. It started faint, like branches brushing against the RV, but it grew louder and more deliberate. Something, or someone, was outside. I peered through the window, but all I saw was darkness. Then came the knocking. 3 sharp knocks on the side of the RV, followed by silence. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice shaking. No answer. I grabbed my hunting rifle and edged toward the door. My heart pounded as I threw it open, aiming into the night. But there was nothing there. Nothing except the faintest outline of a figure in the trees, tall and impossibly thin. The next morning, I decided to leave. I'd had enough, but when I tried to start the RV, the engine wouldn't turn over. I checked under the hood only to find deep scratches gouged into the metal, like claw marks. My chest tightened. I was trapped. Desperation took over. I grabbed my gear and decided to hike out, sprained ankle or not. But as I started down the trail, the forest seemed different. The trees felt closer, the shadows darker, the air thick, oppressive. Every step I took felt like I was being watched. Then I saw it. It was standing in the middle of the trail, about 50 yards ahead. At first it looked human, long limbs, pale skin. But as I stepped closer, its head jerked unnaturally, and its body twisted, bending in ways no human body should. It turned toward me, and I swear it smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too many. "Nicholas, back," it said in Catherine's voice. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my rifle. It started walking toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. I ran. Pain shot through my ankle, but I didn't care. I ran as fast as I could, the creature's laughter echoing behind me. When I reached the old fire tower, I climbed up, hoping the height would give me an advantage. The creature followed. It circled the base of the tower, its voice shifting between Catherine's pleas and a low guttural growl. "Nicholas, don't leave me," it whispered, its voice distorted and mocking. I remembered the stories, the ones I used to laugh at, skinwalkers, creatures that could mimic voices, take on forms, and lure people to their deaths. The locals had always said salt could repel them. It was worth a shot. I dug into my pack and poured a ring of salt around the platform, gripping my rifle tightly. The creature climbed halfway up the tower, but as it neared the salt, it recoiled, letting out an ear-piercing shriek. It stared at me for a long moment, its dark eyes burning with rage, before it slithered back down the ladder and disappeared into the woods. When the sun rose, I climbed down the tower, my legs trembling. The forest felt lighter, less oppressive, but the tracks in the mud told me the creature was still out there. I hobbled back to the RV, praying the engine would start. This time, it did. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw it standing at the edge of the forest. It didn't follow me, but I knew it was watching. I haven't been back to the Hoare National Forest since. I sold the RV, gave up camping, and tried to move on. But at night, I still hear Catherine's voice calling to me from the darkness, and I'll never forget those eyes. My name is Michael Lopez, and I'm 25 years old. This happened in October of last year, when my best friend Sophia and I decided to spend a weekend camping at Dogwood Lake, deep in the heart of southern Indiana. I'll never forget those days, no matter how hard I try. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the laughter. Sophia and I couldn't have been more different. She was bold, impulsive, and always looking for her next adventure. I, on the other hand, preferred plans, structure, and knowing exactly what I was walking into. But she had a way of pulling me out of my comfort zone, and I usually ended up having a good time. Usually, we'd rented an old RV for the trip, a boxy white thing with a sputtering engine that smelled faintly of mildew. I'd suggested staying in a cabin, but Sophia insisted the RV would be more authentic. After some back and forth, I gave in, as I always did. Besides, I was desperate for a break. My teaching job had been wearing me down, and Sophia's promise of crisp autumn air, hiking trails, and kayaking sounded like the reset I needed. We arrived at Dogwood Recreation Area in the late afternoon, just as the sun was dipping below the treetops. The forest was alive with color, fiery reds, deep oranges, and golden yellows that reflected off the still surface of the lake. It was beautiful, but something about the place felt off. I chalked it up to exhaustion and a touch of nerves. Sophia, of course, was thrilled. She grabbed her camera and started snapping photos the moment we parked. "Look at this light," she gushed. "It's perfect." I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. That was Sophia, always chasing the perfect shot. After setting up camp, we decided to explore. There was a well-marked trailhead nearby, but Sophia had other ideas. She'd spotted a faint path leading off into the woods, one that wasn't on the map. "Let's check it out," she said, already heading in that direction. "Are you serious? It's getting dark," I protested. "That's the best time for photos," she called over her shoulder. "Come on, Michael, don't be such a buzzkill." Reluctantly, I followed. The trail, if you could call it that, was narrow and overgrown, twisting through dense trees that blocked out what little sunlight remained. I kept tripping over roots and brushing cobwebs from my face, muttering under my breath about poison ivy and ticks. Sophia, meanwhile, was in her element, snapping pictures of moss-covered rocks and fallen leaves. Then she found it. At first I thought it was just a piece of trash, something shiny poking out of the dirt. But when Sophia bent down and picked it up, I realized it was a locket, an old one, tarnished and rusted, but still intact. She turned it over in her hands, her eyes lighting up with curiosity. "Can you believe this? It's so vintage." "It's gross," I said. "Put it back." But she ignored me, rubbing the locket clean on her sleeve. It's got initials engraved on it. I wonder who it belonged to. Does it matter? It's trash. She shot me a look. It's not trash, it's history. Then she slipped the locket into her pocket. I'm keeping it. I didn't argue. What was the point? Sophia was stubborn, and once she'd made up her mind about something, there was no changing it. That night, things started to feel strange. The heater in the RV wouldn't work, so we huddled under blankets, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that something was out there watching us. But when I mentioned it to Sophia, she laughed it off. "You're just spooked because it's so quiet out here," she said. "City girl problems." Maybe she was right. I told myself I was imagining things, and eventually drifted off to sleep. Then the dreams started. I was standing by the lake, staring at the water. A woman stood on the shore, her back to me. Her hair was long and dark, and she wore a dress that clung to her as if it were soaked. She was holding something, a locket, I realized. Her shoulders shook as though she were crying, but no sound came out. When she turned around, her face was a mask of rage, her eyes hollow and black. She opened her mouth to scream, and I woke up gasping for air. Across the RV, Sophia was sound asleep, the locket clutched in her hand. The next day, Sophia acted normal, but I couldn't shake the dream. I told her about it over breakfast, expecting her to laugh it off again. Instead, she frowned. "That's weird," she said. "I had a dream, too, about a woman at the lake." "What did she do?" "She was just standing there, watching me," she shrugged. "It didn't feel scary, though, just sad." I wasn't convinced. Something about the locket wasn't right, but Sophia refused to get rid of it. "It's just a coincidence," she said. "Don't freak out." But as the day went on, the unease grew. Wet footprints appeared on the RV floor, even though neither of us had been near the water. Items went missing. A flashlight, Sophia's phone charger, only to turn up later in odd places. And then there were the voices. That evening, as we sat by the fire, I heard it. The faint sound of children laughing. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but Sophia heard it too. "Probably just echoes from another campsite," she said, though her tone was less certain. "There's no one else out here," I whispered. We stared into the darkness, but the laughter faded as quickly as it had come. That night, I woke to the sound of the RV door creaking open. Sophia's bed was empty. I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside, my heart pounding. The forest was pitch black, the trees casting long shadows under the sliver of moonlight. I found Sophia standing at the edge of the lake, her feet submerged in the water. She was holding the locket, her lips moving as if she were whispering something, though I couldn't hear the words. "Sophia!" I yelled. She turned slowly, her eyes glazed over. "She wants me to stay," she said, her voice distant and hollow. I grabbed her arm and pulled her back to the RV, but she fought me, her strength unnaturally strong. "Let go. I need to go to her." Finally, I managed to drag her inside and lock the door. She collapsed onto her bed and fell into a deep sleep, but I stayed awake, clutching a knife and listening for the sound of footsteps outside. The next morning, Sophia didn't remember a thing. She laughed it off, but I could see the fear in her eyes. The locket's influence was growing stronger, and I knew we had to leave. But the RV wouldn't start. Sophia tried to call for help, but her phone was dead, even though it had been fully charged the night before. I suggested walking back to the main road, but she refused. "I'm not leaving the RV," she said. "What if someone comes by?" I didn't argue. I couldn't leave her alone, not when she was acting so strange. Instead, I decided to confront the problem head-on. That afternoon, while Sophia was napping, I took the locket and walked to the lake. The air grew colder the closer I got, and the forest seemed unnaturally quiet. I stood at the water's edge, the locket heavy in my hand. "I know you're here," I said. "What do you want?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then the surface of the lake rippled, and the woman appeared. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes dark pits of sorrow and rage. Behind her, shadowy figures emerged, children with hollow eyes and twisted smiles. "Return it," she hissed, her voice like nails on glass. "Return what you stole." I threw the locket into the water and turned to run, but the children's laughter erupted around me, and I felt icy hands grab my ankles. I screamed, kicking and clawing, but the hands dragged me toward the water. Just as I thought I was going to drown, Sophia appeared, her face twisted with fear and determination. She held a stick lit with fire from the RV's stove. "Let her go," she screamed, thrusting the flame toward the water. The ghostly figures recoiled, their shrieks piercing the air. Sophia grabbed my arm and pulled me back to shore. Together, we watched as the locket sank beneath the surface, the ripples fading into stillness. We left Dogwood Lake the next day, abandoning the RV and hitchhiking back to civilization. Neither of us spoke about what had happened, but I knew we'd both been changed. Sophia never picked up her camera again, and I can't look at a lake without feeling a chill run down my spine. Some nights, I still hear the laughter, soft and distant, like an echo from a nightmare. I pray it's just my imagination, but deep down, I know it's not. My name is Camila Adams. I'm 22 years old, and this happened to me last November. It started as a camping trip in Brown County State Park, Indiana. Just a fun, challenging escape with friends. But what I experienced out there wasn't just nature. Something ancient and evil stalked us through that forest, and I barely made it out alive. It was Mason's idea. He was the ringleader in our group of 3, confident, outdoorsy, and just reckless enough to convince us this trip was a good idea. He was 26, with that charming, cocky smile that somehow made me trust him even when I shouldn't. Then there was Ben, Mason's best friend since childhood. He was 25, and the opposite of Mason, reserved, practical, and constantly trying to keep us from getting into trouble. Me? I was just there for the adventure. I'd been feeling stuck lately, living the same routine in Indianapolis, and Mason's enthusiasm made me want to break out of my comfort zone. So when he suggested we tackle an unofficial trail he'd found on some wilderness forum, I thought, why not? We packed light. Mason insisted we didn't need much for a 3-day trip. Looking back, that was mistake number 1. The first day went fine. We parked at the trailhead and hiked deeper into the park than I'd ever been. The colors of the late autumn forest were stunning, rich reds and golds under a steel gray sky. Mason led the way with his usual bravado, joking about how we didn't even need a map because he had the route all figured out. Ben kept muttering about how we should at least double-check our bearings, but Mason brushed him off. By the time we reached our first campsite, we were tired, but in good spirits. We set up a small fire, ate some protein bars, and talked about everything and nothing under the canopy of stars. It was peaceful until the forest went silent. I didn't notice it at first, but Ben did. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice low. "Hear what?" Mason replied, poking at the fire. "Nothing," Ben said. "No crickets, no owls, nothing." Now that he mentioned it, the silence felt wrong. It pressed down on us like a weight, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Mason shrugged it off, saying it was probably the cold weather, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The second day was harder. The hidden path Mason had raved about turned out to be more of a rough deer trail, barely visible under the thick leaves. My legs ached from climbing over fallen trees and trudging through uneven ground. To make matters worse, Ben's compass stopped working. He swore it had been fine yesterday, but now the needle spun uselessly, as if the forest itself was messing with us. Around midday, we found something strange. Deep claw marks scored the bark of a massive oak tree. They were too high up to be from a bear, if there were even bears in this part of Indiana. Mason joked about Bigfoot, but Ben's face darkened. "This isn't right," Ben said. "We should turn back." "Turn back? Come on, man, we're fine," Mason said. "Don't wimp out now." Ben shot me a look that said, "Can you believe this guy?" I wanted to agree with him, but I didn't want to be the one to back down first. So we kept going. That night, the hunger started. Mason devoured most of our food. He claimed he hadn't eaten enough earlier and needed the energy, but the way he tore through the rations was unsettling. His hands shook as he unwrapped granola bars, and his eyes had this wild, hollow look. "You okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, just starving," he muttered, not meeting my gaze. Don't worry about it. Ben pulled me aside while Mason stomped off to gather more firewood. Something's wrong with him, Ben whispered. He's acting off. I know, I said. But what are we supposed to do? Drag him back to the car? Ben didn't answer. He just stared into the dark woods, his jaw tight. Later that night, I heard whispering. I'd stepped away from the campfire to use the bathroom. The air was freezing, my breath puffing white in front of me. That's when I heard it, a low, raspy murmur just beyond the tree line. Ben? Mason? I called, my voice shaking. There was no answer, only the sound of dry leaves crunching underfoot, too far away to be either of them. I ran back to camp, my heart pounding. What's wrong? Mason asked when he saw me. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. Someone's out there, I said, trying to catch my breath. I heard them. It's probably just the wind, Mason said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Ben pulled out the flimsy flashlight Camila had packed, the beam flickering weakly as he scanned the surrounding trees. We need to leave first thing in the morning, he said. Morning didn't come fast enough. I woke up to the sound of Mason vomiting behind the tent. When I went to check on him, I saw blood mixed in with the bile. You're sick, I said, panic rising in my chest. We have to get you out of here. No, Mason rasped, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. I'm fine. You're not fine, Ben snapped. You look like death, and now we're out of food, thanks to you. Mason glared at him, his teeth bared. For a moment, I thought he was going to lunge at Ben, but then he stumbled back, clutching his stomach. Let's just keep moving, he said through gritted teeth. We packed up and started hiking, but Mason was slower now, his breath labored. The trail seemed to twist in on itself, leading us deeper into the forest instead of out. The claw marks appeared more frequently, gouged into the trees like some kind of territorial warning. And then we found the carcass. It was a deer, or at least what was left of one. Its ribs jutted out like spears, the flesh stripped away as if something had gnawed on it. The smell was overwhelming, rotting meat and coppery blood. Mason stared at it for a long time, his eyes wide and unblinking. We need to keep moving, Ben said, grabbing my arm. That night, Mason disappeared. Ben and I woke up to find his sleeping bag empty, his boots gone. We have to find him, I said, but Ben shook his head. He's gone, Camila. We can't save him. We can't just leave him out there, I yelled. Ben sighed, his face lined with exhaustion. Fine, but if we don't find him by sunset, we're heading back. We followed a faint trail of footprints, half expecting to find Mason sitting by a tree, laughing about some stupid prank. Instead, we found him crouched over another deer carcass, his face smeared with blood. Mason? I called out softly. He turned to look at us, and my stomach dropped. His eyes were sunk, his skin stretched taut over his cheekbones, his lips pulled back in a grotesque smile, revealing teeth that looked too sharp, too jagged. The hunger, he whispered. It's inside me. Ben grabbed my hand, pulling me back. Run, he said. We ran, crashing through the underbrush, but Mason, or whatever he'd become, was fast. I could hear him behind us, his ragged breathing growing louder, closer. Go, Ben shouted, shoving me forward. I'll hold him off. No, I screamed, but Ben didn't stop. He turned to face Mason, wielding a large branch like a spear. I didn't see what happened next. I just kept running, tears streaming down my face as I heard Ben's screams echoing through the trees. I stumbled out of the forest at dawn, bloodied and half frozen. Park rangers found me near the trailhead and took me to a hospital. I told them everything, but they didn't believe me. They said Mason and Ben probably got lost and that I was lucky to make it out alive. But I know the truth. Somewhere in those woods, the Wendigo still roams, hungry and waiting for its next victim. My name's Samuel Neven, and back in 2004, I was working as a search and rescue officer in the Daniel Boone National Forest, Kentucky. I didn't grow up around here, though. I came from Indiana, a flat, uneventful place where the most excitement you'd get was a speeding ticket. The move to Kentucky was supposed to bring some adventure, and let me tell you, I got more than I bargained for. When I first got into this line of work, people said it was mainly about finding lost hikers or kids who wandered off the trails. They didn't warn me about the other things in the woods. the things you can't categorize. You see, I wasn't exactly what you'd call an experienced outdoorsman before I took this job. The closest I got to wildlife was grilling burgers in my backyard. But the forest grew on me. It felt like freedom. That was until the day it stopped feeling safe. It was mid-afternoon when the call came in. 2 campers, both young men, had gone missing near Red River Gorge. They had set out the previous morning and hadn't checked back with their friends. That wasn't entirely out of the ordinary. People lose track of time out here all the time. But something about the tone of the call had me on edge. Their friends said they weren't the type to just disappear without a trace. I grabbed my gear and met up with my partner, Carl, an older guy who'd been doing this longer than I'd been alive. He had that look of someone who'd seen it all, but didn't say much about it. As we drove out to the trailhead, Carl kept tapping the wheel like he had something on his mind. Finally, he said, "You ever hear about that thing up in the gorge?" I glanced at him. "What thing?" He didn't answer right away. "Never mind," he muttered. "Just some stories the locals like to tell to scare tourists." We pulled up to the trailhead where we met the friends of the 2 missing campers. They were all rattled, wide-eyed, and shuffling nervously like something bad had already happened. One of them, a guy with a red bandana wrapped around his head, said they had been hiking together when the 2 missing guys went ahead, wanting to explore a cave they'd found. The rest of the group stayed back, and when their friends didn't return by nightfall, they started worrying. Carl, never one for comforting words, just grunted and motioned for me to follow him. We set out on the trail, winding through dense trees and jagged cliffs. The forest was quiet, too quiet. You start to notice these things when you've been out here long enough. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the wind and our footsteps crunching on the dirt. "Shouldn't there be, some wildlife or something?" I asked, trying to break the silence. Carl didn't respond, just picked up the pace, which wasn't exactly reassuring. About an hour in, we found the campsite the missing campers had set up. Tents were there, unzipped, sleeping bags tossed around like they'd left in a hurry. A couple of backpacks were strewn across the ground. What was strange, though, was that there were no signs of a struggle, just an eerie sense of abandonment. I crouched down near one of the backpacks, rifling through it for clues. Inside, I found the usual camping gear, but then I pulled out something odd, a torn piece of fur. It was coarse, thicker than anything I'd seen on a bear or deer. I showed it to Carl, but he just shrugged it off, mumbling something about wild animals. As we moved further into the forest, the trees began to close in around us, their twisted limbs casting distorted shadows on the ground. I felt like we were being watched, like something was out there, just beyond the tree line. Every so often, I'd catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, but every time I turned to look, nothing was there. About half a mile later, we came across something that made my blood run cold. One of the missing campers was slumped against a tree, his body mangled beyond recognition. His torso was torn open, jagged cuts running along his chest and arms, as if something had sliced him up with claws or teeth. There was no blood on the ground, though, which made it even more unsettling. Whatever did this didn't just kill him, it took its time. I staggered back, feeling bile rise in my throat. Carl knelt down to examine the body, his face grim but not surprised. "This isn't normal," he muttered. "No kidding," I whispered. "What could have done this?" Carl stood up slowly, scanning the area. "Not sure, but we need to find the other one." The other one, right. There were 2. I had almost forgotten. My mind was still reeling from the sight in front of me. But we had a job to do. We pressed on, following a faint trail of broken branches and disturbed underbrush. It was getting darker, but we couldn't turn back now. About an hour later, we found the second camper, or at least what was left of him. His body was hanging from a tree, suspended by a mess of vines and branches. It looked like he'd been lifted up and shredded apart, his limbs dangling at odd angles. I could barely breathe at this point. It was like we had stumbled into some twisted hunting ground. "We should call this in," I said, my voice shaking. Carl didn't move. He was staring at something off to the side, just beyond the body. Look! I followed his gaze and saw it. Movement in the trees. Something was crouching low, its shape barely visible in the shadows. It was huge, larger than anything I'd ever seen before. Its body was covered in matted fur, like that of a wild boar, but its movements were more feline, smooth and predatory. The creature's head was elongated, almost like a wolf's, but it had this strange, twisted quality to it, as if nature had gone wrong somewhere. It stood there for a moment, staring at us, before letting out a low, rumbling sound that vibrated in my chest. Carl grabbed my arm, snapping me out of my daze. Run? I always figured if anything bad ever happened to me, it would be out on the open road, miles away from anyone who could help. Maybe that's why I started carrying a gun. I never wanted to feel helpless. Not that I've had to use it before, but it's there, tucked under the seat of my rig, just in case. The highway was quieter than usual that night, and I was heading west, cutting through some remote stretch of Wyoming. The air was crisp, a bite of winter hanging on, even though it should have been warmer by now. I had a load of lumber bound for some construction site in Idaho. Nothing out of the ordinary. My mind was on the job. The kind of solitary thinking that comes when you're hours into a long haul. It wasn't until I hit the small, nearly forgotten town of Pine Ridge that things started to feel off. Not that there was much to the place. A single gas station, a diner that looked like it hadn't served a hot meal in years, and a couple of houses with their windows boarded up. I needed to refuel, so I pulled into the gas station, the only sign of life in the whole town. The pump was ancient, the kind where you have to flip the lever to start the gas flowing. As I filled up, I noticed the attendant inside the station, a wiry man with a weathered face. He was watching me, his eyes never leaving me. I gave him a nod, more out of habit than friendliness, but he didn't respond, just kept staring like he was sizing me up. It made my skin crawl, but I chalked it up to small-town suspicion. Strangers don't exactly roll through Pine Ridge every day. I paid for the gas and got back in the truck, eager to put some miles between me and that town. As I pulled out, I noticed an old beat-up pickup truck parked on the side of the road. I hadn't seen it when I pulled in, but then again, I wasn't paying much attention. The thing looked like it hadn't run in years, rust eating away at the body and the tires flat against the pavement. An hour later, the road was deserted, just a ribbon of black cutting through the wilderness. That's when I saw the headlights in my mirror. At first, it was just a faint glow, but they got closer. Fast. Too fast. My heart picked up, and I checked my speed. Maybe I was going too slow, but no, I was doing the limit. The lights got brighter, and I could make out the outline of the vehicle behind me. It was that old pickup from Pine Ridge, the same rusted hulk that looked like it shouldn't even be on the road. I kept my eyes on the mirror, expecting the truck to pass me by, but it didn't. Instead, it rode my tail, the headlights nearly blinding me. I tapped the brakes, a warning, but the pickup didn't back off. If anything, it got closer. Something wasn't right. I sped up, trying to put some distance between us, but the pickup matched my speed, staying just a few feet behind me. The road ahead was nothing but darkness, and my mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I reached under the seat, feeling for the cold metal of the gun. My hand gripped the handle, but I didn't pull it out, not yet. There was a turn up ahead, a sharp one. I could lose him there, maybe. I flicked on my blinker, even though there was no one else around to see it, and took the turn hard. For a moment, I thought I'd lost him. The road curved through a dense patch of trees, and I couldn't see the headlights anymore. But then they reappeared, brighter than before, as the pickup tore around the bend, nearly clipping the back of my rig. Panic set in, and I floored it, the engine roaring as I pushed the truck faster than I'd ever dared before. The pickup stayed with me. Relentless. I couldn't shake him. And then, like something out of a nightmare, he started ramming me. The first hit jolted me so hard I almost lost control. My trailer fishtailed, the weight of the lumber threatening to tip the whole rig over. I gripped the wheel tighter, fighting to keep us on the road. Another hit. harder this time, and I knew I had to do something, or he'd run me off the road completely. I glanced at the gun still under the seat, but the thought of using it while driving terrified me. Instead, I scanned the road ahead, looking for anything that might help. Up ahead, I saw a narrow dirt road branching off to the right. It wasn't on my map, and I had no idea where it led, but it was my only option. I cut the wheel hard, veering off the main road onto the dirt path. The rig shuddered as the tires hit the rough ground, and I prayed the trailer wouldn't flip. The pickup followed right on my tail, its headlights bouncing in the darkness. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for my truck, and lined with thick trees on either side. I could hear the pickup's engine roaring behind me, getting closer and closer. My mind raced with desperate ideas, none of them good. I could try to lose him in the trees, but one wrong move, and I'd be wrapped around a trunk. And then, out of nowhere, the road ended. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding in the dirt, and the rig came to a stop just inches from a steep drop-off. The pickup didn't stop. It rammed into the back of my trailer with a sickening crunch, and I heard metal tearing as the trailer swayed dangerously over the edge. The impact threw me forward, and I fought to stay in control. I could feel the weight of the lumber shifting, the whole rig threatening to go over. I had seconds, maybe less. I didn't think. I yanked the gun out from under the seat, kicked open the door, and jumped out. I hit the ground hard, rolling to avoid the drop-off. The pickup's engine was still running, the headlights casting an eerie glow over the scene. I scrambled to my feet, the gun in my hand, and turned to face the pickup. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and covered in grease and grime, his clothes tattered, hanging off him like they'd been through hell. He didn't say a word, just started walking toward me, his steps slow and deliberate. I leveled the gun at him, my hands shaking. "Stay back!" I shouted, but he kept coming. Closer now, I could see his face. It was twisted, scarred, like he'd been in 100 fights and lost every one of them. His eyes were cold, empty, like there was nothing human left inside him. He didn't stop. I pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the trees, and the man staggered but didn't go down. He looked at me, more surprised than hurt, and then kept coming. I fired again, and this time he dropped to one knee, blood seeping through his shirt. But he wasn't dead. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a knife, and lunged at me. I fired a third time, hitting him square in the chest. He crumpled to the ground, finally still. I stood there, gasping for breath, the gun still in my hand. The night was silent now, the only sound my own ragged breathing. I walked over to the pickup, looking for any sign of why he'd chased me, but there was nothing. The cab was empty, no ID, no belongings, just a truck that shouldn't have been running. I looked back at the man, his body lying lifeless on the ground. There was no question he was dead. I had the gun, the spent shells, and his blood on my hands. This wasn't something I could just drive away from. But as I stood there, I realized something else. The rig was teetering on the edge, the weight of the lumber pulling it closer to the drop-off. I ran back to it, climbed inside, and slowly, carefully backed it away from the edge. Once I was clear, I drove back to the main road, my heart still pounding. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, where I found a diner that was still open. I sat in a booth, the gun hidden in my jacket, and ordered a coffee. The waitress gave me a strange look, but didn't say anything. I didn't tell anyone about what happened, not even the cops. When they eventually found the man's body a few days later, the newspapers called it a tragic accident. An unidentified man found dead in the woods. They never connected it to me, and I never offered up any information. I finished my coffee, paid the bill, and got back on the road. The sun was starting to rise, and I had miles to go before my next stop. As I drove, I tried not to think about the man or why he'd come after me. It didn't matter now. He was dead, and I was still alive. That was enough.